We are not going to sit here and pretend you didn't know what you were doing.
Yes.
Stop blaming me for everything that goes wrong in
The
your
plane
life.
jolted hard without warning. Marianne's hand tightened around the armrest, but she didn't scream. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Ben didn't. What the hell was that? He snapped, his voice sharp, eyes glued to the shaking cabin. His knee bounced uncontrollably. This is exactly why I hate flying. Marianne turned toward him, surprised by the anger more than the movement of the plane. It's just turbulence, she said calmly. It happens. We're fine. Ben let out a short, humorless laugh. That's easy for you to say. You act like nothing can go wrong. She frowned. I didn't say that. I just don't let fear run my life. He scoffed. That's not courage. That's denial. Trusting things you can't control doesn't make you brave. Marianne straightened in her seat. And thinking you can control everything doesn't make you safe. Another bump rattled the overhead bins. A few passengers gasped. Ben's jaw clenched. You really think staying calm changes anything? He shot back. Planes crash. People die. Faith doesn't stop physics. Her eyes didn't waver. No, she said evenly. But fear steals peace, long before anything else does. Ben turned fully toward her now, voice lower, tighter. Peace is a luxury for people who haven't lost everything. The words hung heavy between them. Marianne's expression softened, not with pity, but with understanding. You don't know me, she said quietly. And you don't know what I've survived. For the first time, Ben didn't have a reply. The plane steadied, but the tension between them didn't. The seatbelt sign chimed again. The captain's voice came over the speakers, calm, practiced, but it did nothing for Ben. His hands were clenched now, knuckles pale, breath shallow. He stared straight ahead like if he looked away, something terrible would happen. Marianne noticed. She hesitated, then spoke more gently. Hey, look at me for a second. He didn't. I'm serious, he muttered. I don't do this. I never do this. The plane shuddered again, lighter this time, but enough to make his control crack. His chest rose sharply, like he couldn't pull in enough air. Marianne leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You're safe right now, she said. I promise. That did it. Don't say that, Ben snapped, turning toward her with sudden heat in his eyes. You don't get to promise things you can't guarantee. A nearby passenger glanced over. Marianne stayed focused on him. Why are you so afraid? She asked, not accusing, not soft, just honest. He swallowed. Hard. My wife trusted promises, he said quietly. So did my kids. Marianne froze. They got on a plane, he continued, voice shaking despite his effort to steady it. Everyone said it was routine. Normal, safe. The words came faster now, like they'd been waiting too long. I buried them 3 months later. The noise of the cabin faded. All Marianne could hear was his breathing, ragged, uneven, real. I don't believe in pretending everything will be okay, Ben said. I've seen what happens when it's not. Marianne didn't argue. She reached out, stopping just short of touching his arm. I'm not pretending, she said softly. I'm choosing how I face the fear. He looked at her then, really looked. And you? He asked. You're not scared at all. She met his eyes. I am, she said. I just refuse to let it turn me into someone I don't recognize. The plane smoothed out completely. Ben exhaled, long and broken, like something inside him finally loosened. Marianne turned slightly toward the aisle, then back to him. Let me ask you something, she said. Have you ever judged someone in the middle of a moment like this, and later realized you were wrong? She didn't wait for an answer. Because if you stay right here, she added quietly, this argument you and I are having, it doesn't end the way you think it will. Ben leaned back slowly, staring at the seat in front of him, as if it might answer for him. The anger that had fueled his words minutes ago was gone now, replaced by something heavier. I didn't mean to snap at you, he said at last. His voice was lower, rougher. I don't handle moments like this well. Marianne nodded once. I figured. Silence settled between them. Not awkward, not peaceful, just honest. the kind that forces people to sit with themselves. Ben broke it. You really believe fear shouldn't decide things? I do, she replied. Because fear already takes enough from us. He let out a quiet breath. You talk like someone who hasn't been protected by money or power. She smiled faintly. I haven't been protected by either. That caught his attention. My life looks simple, she continued, but it hasn't been easy. I've lost people too. I just learned early that if I let fear lead, I'd stop living. Ben shook his head slowly. You don't even know me, and yet here you are, talking to me like you see straight through me. Maybe, she said. Or maybe I just see a man who's hurting and pretending he isn't. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time since the plane took off, his shoulders relaxed. Marianne glanced toward the window, then back at him. Let me ask you something, and I mean this for you and anyone listening to this story. She paused, letting the moment breathe. Have you ever judged someone in a single moment, only to realize later that moment changed your entire life? Ben didn't answer. He couldn't. Marianne continued, her voice calm but certain, because what started as an argument between two strangers on this flight doesn't end here. It leads to a place neither of us could have planned. She leaned back in her seat. And if you think this conversation ends when the plane lands, she added softly, you're wrong. A beat. If you've ever had one unexpected moment, flip your life upside down, she said, take a second. Let people know you're here. Share your thoughts. Stay with this story. The plane continued forward, steady now. But something else had already shifted. Marianne stood near the gate window, her boarding pass folded carefully between her fingers. Not crumpled, not wrinkled, just held. The airport moved around her the way it always did, rolling suitcases, low conversations, the distant call of announcements echoing overhead. But she stayed still, feet planted, shoulders relaxed, breathing slow. She glanced at the time on the screen above the gate. Still early. Good. She liked being early. It gave her space to think. Marianne reached into her purse and brushed her thumb across the small notebook tucked inside. She didn't pull it out. She already knew what was written there. Names, notes, little reminders scribbled during lunch breaks and after school hours. Kids who needed help. Kids who needed someone to notice. Her lips curved slightly at the thought. Well, she murmured, barely audible, this is for you. She turned her attention back to the window. The plane sat quietly outside, waiting. It didn't rush. It didn't worry. It just existed, ready to go when called. She liked that about it. Marianne adjusted the strap of her purse and rolled her shoulders once, loosening tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. The gala tonight wasn't small. She knew that. Big donors, big names, big rooms, where people sometimes forgot how to speak like humans. But that wasn't why she was going. She'd told herself that all week. She was going because of Jamal, who stayed after class pretending to sharpen pencils just so he didn't have to go home yet. Because of Emily, who read 2 grade levels above everyone else but never raised her hand. Because of Marcus, who asked once, quietly, if college was only for kids with money. Marianne swallowed at that memory. No, she told him, firm and smiling. College is for kids who work hard. Like you. That was the truth she believed in. Not because it sounded good, but because she'd seen it work. Faith had taught her that service wasn't about being seen. It was about showing up, over and over, even when you were tired, even when no one noticed. She'd learned that early. Her phone buzzed once in her hand. A message from her mother. You okay, baby? Marianne smiled. I'm good, just waiting to board. A pause. Then another message. We're proud of you. Her throat tightened just a little. Thank you, she whispered, even though no one was there to hear it. She slipped the phone back into her purse and closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not long, just long enough to breathe. Faith for her wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet reassurance, a steady presence that said, you're where you're supposed to be. She opened her eyes as boarding was announced. Marianne stepped forward with the group, moving easily, greeting the attendant with a polite nod as she handed over her pass. She walked down the narrow aisle, counting rows automatically, her mind still drifting between the kids back home and the night ahead. 14. There. She stopped. Someone was already there. Marianne hesitated, then smiled gently. Hi. Excuse me, she said. I think I'm right here. The man looked up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed neatly. But there was something closed off about him. Not rude, just distant, like someone who preferred silence to conversation. Oh, he said, shifting slightly. Yeah. That's the middle seat. She nodded. Thank you. Marianne slid in carefully, keeping her movements small, mindful not to crowd him. She buckled her seatbelt, resting her hands loosely in her lap. She didn't rush to speak. Silence didn't bother her. The man beside her, Ben, though she didn't know his name yet, sat stiffly, eyes forward, jaw tight. Marianne noticed, but she didn't comment. Everyone carried something. She'd learned that too. The plane door closed with a muted thud. Marianne exhaled slowly. She felt it then, that familiar flutter, not fear, anticipation, purpose, the sense that this trip mattered. She glanced down at her hands and smiled faintly. All right, she whispered to herself. Let's do this. The engines began to hum. The plane inched forward. Marianne closed her eyes again, just for a second, and pressed her feet flat against the floor. She wasn't asking for anything extravagant. Just safe travel, clear thoughts, a chance to speak honestly when it mattered. When the plane lifted, she felt the familiar pull in her stomach and breathed through it. Calm, steady, present. Beside her, she sensed tension, sharp, contained, almost vibrating, but she didn't turn yet. Some things needed space before they could soften. The first bump came suddenly. Marianne's fingers tightened briefly, then relaxed. It's okay, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. She opened her eyes. Ben didn't look at her. His hands were gripping the armrests, knuckles pale, shoulders rigid. His breathing was controlled, but barely. Marianne studied him quietly. Fear looked different on everyone. On some people, it was loud. On others, like him, it was locked away behind discipline and restraint. She didn't judge it. Another small jolt. Marianne inhaled. Ben muttered something under his breath. She couldn't quite hear it. She turned her head slightly toward the window, giving him room. Not avoidance, just respect. Faith had taught her that too, knowing when to speak and when to simply be present. The seatbelt sign stayed lit. Marianne rested her head back against the seat, eyes forward now, calm settling back in. Whatever tonight held, she was ready. She always was. Not because she was fearless, but because she trusted that purpose didn't disappear when things felt uncertain. And she had no idea yet that this quiet confidence would soon be tested in ways she never expected. Ben kept his eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him, not because it was interesting, because looking anywhere else felt dangerous. The numbers on the safety card blurred together, though he'd read them 100 times before. He didn't need instructions. He needed control, or at least the illusion of it. His hands rested on the armrests, fingers curled just enough to feel grounded. He was aware of everything, the vibration under his feet, the low hum of the engines, the faint rattle somewhere above. Too aware. He swallowed. Just breathe. In, out. He counted silently, the way he always did. 4 in, 4 out. Again. The woman beside him, Marianne, though he still didn't know her name, sat with an ease that irritated him more than he wanted to admit. She wasn't fidgeting, wasn't checking the aisle every few seconds, wasn't gripping anything like it might disappear. She looked settled. Ben shifted slightly, creating a sliver of space between them. It wasn't personal. It never was. He just needed room, distance, the sense that if things went wrong, he wasn't trapped inside someone else's calm. The plane continued climbing. His chest tightened. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. That trick never worked for long. Flying hadn't always been like this. Once, years ago, he'd boarded planes half asleep, headphones on, barely aware of takeoff. Airports had meant destinations, meetings, vacations, life moving forward. Now, they meant waiting. Waiting for the moment when his body would betray him, when memory would creep in without permission. His jaw clenched. Not now. A soft voice drifted over him. "You okay?" He stiffened. Marianne hadn't turned fully toward him. She'd asked like someone checking the weather. Neutral. No pressure. "I'm fine," he said quickly. Too quickly. She nodded once and looked back ahead. The conversation could have ended there, but his heart was pounding now, loud enough that he was sure she could hear it. Another faint shudder ran through the plane. Ben's breath hitched. His mind went somewhere he didn't want it to go. A different flight, a different day, a different set of voices telling him everything was normal. He pressed his lips together. Don't. But grief didn't listen. It never did. He saw it again, not visually, not exactly, but in that sharp, emotional way that didn't need images. His wife's voice, light and teasing, telling him to relax. His kids laughing about the tiny windows, arguing over who got which seat. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Well," he muttered, mostly to himself. Marianne heard it. She turned slightly. Not all the way, just enough to acknowledge him. "Flying's not your thing, huh?" He let out a short breath. Half a laugh, half a warning. That's one way to put it. She waited. He wasn't used to that. People usually filled silence, asked more questions, tried to fix things. She didn't. "I don't like being trapped," he added after a moment. "Up here, there's no exit. No plan B." Marianne nodded slowly. "Makes sense." Her answer caught him off guard. Most people jumped straight to reassurance. Statistics. Smiles. Words meant to smooth things over. She didn't do that. "I used to think I could plan my way out of anything," Ben continued before he could stop himself. "Schedules, money, backup plans. I thought if I covered every angle, nothing bad could touch us." "Us." The word slipped out. Marianne didn't react. Not outwardly, but her attention sharpened. "And then?" she asked quietly. Ben stared straight ahead. "And then I was wrong." His fingers tightened again. He could feel his pulse in his wrists. "They were on a flight," he said. "Short one. Routine. I wasn't even worried." His voice dropped, almost flat. "I never got to say goodbye." The cabin noise seemed to fade, or maybe he just stopped noticing it. Marianne's breath caught, just slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. Not rushed, not dramatic, just real. He shrugged, a stiff, incomplete motion. "People always are. That doesn't make it less true." He turned his head then, just enough to see her face. Her expression wasn't pitying. It wasn't curious. It was steady, present. Something inside him cracked. "They died," he said bluntly. "My wife. My kids." The words landed heavy. Marianne didn't flinch. She placed her hands together in her lap, grounding herself, like she was holding the weight of what he'd just shared with care. "I don't fly because I like control," Ben continued. "I fly because sometimes you can't avoid it, but every time it feels like I'm daring the universe to take more from me." The plane gave another mild shake. Ben's breath stuttered. Marianne leaned slightly closer, not touching him, not invading his space. Just close enough that her voice dropped naturally. "You're still here," she said. He let out a bitter laugh. "That's the problem." She studied him for a moment. "Why?" "Because surviving when they didn't." He shook his head. "It messes with you." Silence followed, longer this time. Ben stared at the tray table, then at his hands. His fingers were trembling now. He hadn't noticed when that started. "I don't believe in pretending everything will be okay," he said finally. "I've lived through the opposite." Marianne nodded. "I don't pretend either." He looked at her again. "Then how are you so calm?" She paused. "Well," she said slowly, choosing her words, "I'm not calm because I think nothing bad can happen." "Then why?" Because I don't want fear to decide who I am. Ben frowned. Fear keeps people alive. It can, she agreed. It can also keep them frozen. Another pause. The engines steadied. The plane smoothed out, at least for now. Ben leaned back slightly, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the flight. I didn't mean to snap at you earlier, he said quietly. Marianne offered a small smile. I know. He hesitated. You didn't have to listen. I wanted to. That simple sentence landed harder than he expected. Ben looked away, swallowing. The fear was still there. The grief, too. Those things didn't vanish because of a conversation, but for the first time since boarding, he didn't feel completely alone in it. The seatbelt sign remained on, and the space between them, once rigid, defensive, felt thinner, still tense, still unfinished, but no longer empty. The plane continued forward, steady now, but Ben didn't loosen his grip. He noticed the space first, or rather, the lack of it. The middle seat. He'd seen it when he booked the ticket. Had hesitated. Had almost changed the flight. Almost paid extra. Almost done anything else. Almost wasn't enough. He shifted slightly, angling his shoulders inward, trying to make himself smaller without actually shrinking. His arm brushed the edge of the armrest between them, and he pulled back immediately, like contact itself carried risk. Marianne noticed the movement, not in a way that felt invasive, more like awareness, the kind that came from years of standing too close to nervous children, learning when closeness helped and when it didn't. She adjusted herself subtly, tucking her elbow closer to her side. There. Space. Ben exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. Sorry, he muttered, not looking at her. For what? She asked. He shrugged. I usually sit alone. Oh, she said. A small pause. I can switch if you want. He shook his head too quickly. No, it's fine, really. It wasn't. But he wasn't about to say that. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The overhead vents hummed. Someone a few rows back laughed at something on their phone. Normal sounds. Ordinary moments. Ben's chest tightened anyway. He glanced down the aisle, counting rows, exits, distances. Habits he didn't remember forming, but relied on now. Marianne folded her hands in her lap, posture relaxed. She stared ahead, not at the window this time, but at nothing in particular. Present, grounded. It irritated him. Not because she was doing anything wrong, because he couldn't do the same. Another faint vibration passed through the plane. Ben's knee bounced once, twice, then stopped as he caught himself. He hated being seen like this. Hated feeling exposed by proximity. Long flight? Marianne asked softly. He hesitated. Not really. Still uncomfortable? He let out a short breath. That obvious? She smiled a little. Only if you know what to look for. Well, he paused, then gave a half shrug. I don't love being boxed in. She nodded. Neither do I. I just handle it differently. How so? She tilted her head, thinking. I remind myself I chose to be here. Ben frowned slightly. Chose? Yes. I could have said no to this trip. That's not always an option. Sometimes it is, she replied gently. Sometimes it just doesn't feel like it. He looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't dismissing his fear. She wasn't challenging it either. She was naming something underneath it. Choice. He didn't respond. Instead, he shifted again, trying to reclaim space that didn't exist. The seat felt narrower than it had a minute ago. Marianne noticed and leaned subtly toward the aisle, giving him a few inches more. Not dramatic, not announced, just offered. Ben's shoulders eased a fraction. Thank you, he said quietly. She nodded once. Of course. Silence returned, not empty, just tight. Ben stared at the seatbelt sign, then at the crease in his pants, then at nothing at all. His mind drifted to how often he'd chosen distance over connection. Empty seats, quiet rooms, closed doors. Distance felt safer. But sitting here, inches from a stranger who refused to be rattled by his discomfort, made him aware of something else. Distance also kept things untouched, unchanged. He cleared his throat. You don't seem nervous. Marianne considered that. I am, she admitted, just not in the same way. What way is that? I get nervous about whether I'm doing enough, she said, about whether the people I care about are okay, about whether I'm showing up the way I should. He huffed softly. That sounds exhausting. She smiled. It can be. Another pause. Ben shifted again, then stopped himself. His body wanted escape. His mind wanted control. Neither was available. Most people try to distract themselves, he said. Movies, music, anything. She gestured toward his blank phone. You didn't. He shrugged. Didn't feel like it. Why not? He thought about that longer than he expected to. Because distraction doesn't stop memory. Marianne's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. I get that, she said quietly. The plane remained steady, but the tension between them hadn't vanished. It had changed shape, less sharp, more exposed. Ben leaned back, head against the seat, eyes closing briefly. Too close, too personal, too soon. And yet, he didn't ask her to move. Marianne remained where she was, calm, breathing evenly, aware that this seat, this unwanted closeness, was already doing something neither of them had planned. The flight was supposed to be silent. It wasn't, and it wouldn't be. The plane cruised forward, steady now, almost deceptively so. Ben noticed it. The way the air felt smoother, the way the engine settled into a quieter rhythm. His body didn't follow. His shoulders remained tense, jaw tight, like his muscles hadn't gotten the message yet. Marianne shifted slightly in her seat, rolling one shoulder, then the other. Not restlessness, just ease. She glanced toward the window, watching clouds slide past, white and endless. Well, she murmured, mostly to herself. Ben caught it anyway. What? He asked. She blinked, then smiled faintly. Nothing. Just thinking. He let out a breath. You seem good at that. At thinking. At staying calm while doing it. She tilted her head. I wouldn't call it calm. What would you call it? Practice. He frowned. Practice at what? Not letting fear decide how I speak to people. The words hit closer than she probably realized. Ben shifted, his knee bouncing once before he stilled it again. Fear isn't always the enemy, he said. Sometimes it's the only honest thing in the room. Marianne turned slightly toward him. Not confrontational. Curious. Honest how? It doesn't pretend, he said. It doesn't sugarcoat. When fear shows up, it's because something can actually go wrong. She nodded slowly. I agree. That surprised him. But, she continued, fear also doesn't tell the whole story. He scoffed quietly. Life doesn't either. A pause settled between them. Marianne folded her hands together again, thumbs brushing lightly, a small grounding habit. Can I ask you something? She said. He hesitated. Depends. She smiled at that. Fair enough. She waited a beat anyway. When things go wrong for you, she asked gently, do you feel like it's proof the world can't be trusted, or that you were just unlucky? He stared straight ahead. That's a heavy question for seat 14, he muttered. She let out a soft breath. I know. Silence stretched. Ben's mind drifted, uninvited, to the word unlucky. He'd heard it before. People used it when they didn't know what else to say, when they needed to make sense of loss without touching it. I don't believe in luck anymore, he said finally. Marianne nodded. I don't either. He glanced at her. Then what do you believe in? She didn't answer right away. Well, she said slowly, eyes still forward. I believe people carry more than they show. I believe showing up matters, even when you're scared. And I believe pain doesn't get to be the loudest voice forever. His jaw tightened. That sounds nice. It doesn't always feel nice. There was no defensiveness in her tone. Just truth. Another small vibration rippled through the plane. Ben's fingers tightened reflexively. He noticed Marianne inhale, not sharply, not dramatically, but deep enough to steady herself. He watched it happen. Doesn't that ever get tiring? He asked. Always choosing optimism. She shook her head gently. I don't choose optimism. No? I choose purpose. He let out a humorless laugh. Purpose doesn't stop planes from falling out of the sky. No, she agreed, but it stops me from falling apart while they don't. That did something to him. He looked at her fully now, really seeing her. Not just calm, not just kind, intentional. You talk like you've been tested, he said. She met his gaze. I have. He waited for her to explain. She didn't. That boundary, clear, quiet, made him respect her more than a long speech ever could. Ben leaned back, head resting against the seat, eyes closing for a brief moment. His breathing slowed, not because his fear had disappeared, but because his anger had softened. You know, he said after a moment, eyes still closed, most people either avoid this stuff or drown in it. And you? She asked. He opened his eyes. I build walls. She nodded. Walls feel safe. They are. For a while, that landed hard. Ben swallowed. His throat felt tight now for a different reason. The plane hummed on, unbothered by the emotional undercurrent passing through seat 14. Marianne turned back toward the window, giving him space again. Not retreating, just allowing. Ben stared at the ceiling. Optimism and pain sat side by side between them, neither winning, neither retreating. The tension hadn't broken. It had simply changed shape. The seatbelt sign stayed on longer than expected. Ben noticed. He always did. The plane was steady, smooth enough that most passengers had already relaxed into screens or sleep. Someone nearby laughed softly at something on a tablet. A child kicked the back of a seat 2 rows ahead, then stopped when a parent whispered a warning. Normal sounds, ordinary moments. None of it touched him. He sat upright, hands resting on his thighs now instead of the armrests. It was an effort, letting go like that, but gripping too hard had started to feel pointless. Marianne shifted slightly beside him, crossing one ankle over the other. The movement was unhurried, comfortable, like she trusted the space she occupied. Ben envied that more than he wanted to admit. Well, he said suddenly, then stopped. Marianne turned her head just enough to acknowledge him. Yeah. He exhaled, rubbing his thumb against his index finger. You don't seem like someone who gets shaken easily. She thought about that. I get shaken, she said. I just don't let it decide my next move. He let out a quiet breath. Must be nice. She didn't respond right away. Ben, she said carefully, testing the name in her mouth now that she knew it. You don't have to fix everything in one flight. He stiffened slightly. I'm not trying to... I know, she said gently. I just want you to know, I'm not trying to fix you either. That made him uncomfortable. People always tried to fix him, or avoid him, or pretend he was fine because it made things easier. This was different. He looked away, jaw tightening. I didn't ask for this conversation. She nodded. I know. Another pause. The plane gave a small, almost playful dip, nothing serious, but Ben's body reacted before his mind could. His shoulders tensed, breath catching. Marianne noticed. She didn't reach for him. She didn't speak either. She just stayed where she was. That somehow made it worse. You ever wish, Ben said quietly, eyes forward, that you could go back to before you knew too much? Marianne's lips parted slightly, then closed again. She took a breath. Sometimes, what stops you? She smiled faintly. Reality, he huffed. Yeah, the seatbelt sign chimed. Still on. Still no release. Ben's foot tapped once against the floor, then stilled. I don't like being this close to people, he admitted. Not because of them. Because of what they expect. Marianne considered that. What do you think I expect? He hesitated. That I open up. That I move on. That I get better. She turned toward him then. Fully. I don't expect any of that, she said calmly. I expect honesty, even if it's uncomfortable. He studied her face, searching for something that wasn't there. Pressure, judgment, impatience. He didn't find it. And if honesty looks like distance? He asked. Then distance is honest, she replied. That answer disarmed him more than anything else she'd said. The plane continued forward, engines humming low and steady. Ben leaned back slightly, staring up at the ceiling, eyes unfocused. His chest felt tight, not panicked, just heavy, like something unresolved had been stirred up and left there. You don't scare me, Marianne added softly. He turned his head toward her. That wasn't my goal. I know, she said. I just wanted you to hear it. He didn't respond. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It wasn't hostile either. It was suspended, waiting. The kind of silence that didn't promise resolution. The captain's voice crackled faintly over the speaker, mentioning remaining flight time. Ben barely registered it. He glanced toward the window, then back ahead. The clouds outside looked endless, the horizon unclear. Marianne adjusted her seatbelt slightly, then rested her hands again in her lap. She looked forward now too, giving him back his space. They sat like that, side by side, close but not connected, aware of each other, without pretending comfort had arrived. Whatever had started between them wasn't finished, not even close. And as the plane carried them onward, it was clear this flight wouldn't offer answers, only questions. The warning light blinked on again. Ben noticed before the chime even sounded. His body had learned the pattern faster than his mind ever could. The plane dipped, just slightly, but it was enough. A ripple of murmurs passed through the cabin. Someone gasped. A drink tray rattled somewhere up ahead. Ben's breath caught in his throat. Well, he muttered, stopping himself as the plane jolted again, harder this time. Marianne felt it too. Her shoulders stiffened briefly before she consciously relaxed them, feet pressing into the floor, grounding herself. The turbulence didn't settle. Another drop. Sharper. Ben's hand shot out, gripping the armrest between them before he could think better of it. His chest rose fast, shallow. Okay. Okay, he whispered, more command than comfort. The captain's voice crackled faintly overhead, calm and distant. It barely registered. Marianne turned toward him. Not quickly, not dramatically, just present. This part doesn't last long, she said softly. Ben shook his head, eyes fixed forward. They always say that. The plane rocked again, enough to draw a few startled sounds from nearby rows. Marianne inhaled, slow and deliberate. You're not wrong to be scared, she added quietly. That stopped him. He turned his head slightly. What? Fear makes sense, she said, especially when you don't feel in control. The turbulence continued, forcing conversation the way silence had failed to. Ben swallowed. Control's an illusion up here. Marianne nodded. It is. The plane jolted once more, then steadied, just a little. Enough to breathe. Marianne could have looked away. She could have put in headphones, pretended not to notice the tension radiating off him like heat. She didn't. She watched the way his fingers trembled, just barely. The way his jaw locked tight, like letting go would mean something worse followed. Hey, she said gently. Try matching your breathing to mine. Ben let out a short, humorless breath. I don't do breathing exercises. She smiled faintly. You are right now. You're just fighting it. Another bump. Ben winced. This is a bad idea. What is? Talking, he said. If I lose focus. You're not losing focus, she interrupted softly. You're sharing it. He hesitated. She inhaled again, slow enough to be noticed. Well, she said, trailing off deliberately. Despite himself, Ben followed her lead. In, out. His breath hitched halfway through, but he didn't stop. Marianne didn't rush him. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, she said. I'm just here. That simple sentence, I'm just here, did something strange to him. It didn't fix anything, but it softened the edges. The turbulence eased slightly. Ben's shoulders dropped a fraction. People think fear looks dramatic, Ben said quietly. Crying, shaking, panic. Marianne nodded. Sometimes it does, but most of the time, he continued. Voice low, it's quieter. Like this pressure in your chest that never really leaves. She waited. I used to fly all the time, he added. Didn't even think about it. A pause. Until I had a reason to. Marianne didn't ask. Ben swallowed hard. Loss changes how you hear things. Every sound feels louder. Every movement feels final. The plane shuddered again, lighter this time. My kids loved flying, he said suddenly. They'd fight over the window seat. Marianne's breath caught. They thought turbulence was fun. His voice cracked. Not fully, just enough. I don't, he finished. Silence followed. Not awkward, heavy. Marianne rested her hands together, grounding herself. Thank you for telling me. He shook his head. I didn't mean to. Sometimes meaning to isn't the point, she said. He let out a long breath, exhausted. The turbulence faded, replaced by a steady hum. Ben leaned back, eyes closed briefly. When he opened them again, he looked different, less guarded, more exposed. I'm Ben, he said finally. Ben Carter. Marianne turned toward him fully now. Marianne. They shook hands, brief and careful. She tilted her head slightly. Carter, she repeated. As in, the Carter Foundation. His jaw tightened. Yeah. Her eyes widened, not with awe, but recognition. Oh. He braced himself. Questions, assumptions, distance. Instead, she smiled. My church partners with your education fund, she said. We've sent 3 kids to college because of it. Ben blinked. You have? She nodded. I'm a teacher. Something shifted, not loudly, but permanently. Ben studied her differently now, not as a stranger beside him, but as someone connected to parts of his life he hadn't expected to touch mid-flight. I didn't know, he said quietly. She shrugged. Most people don't. The plane cruised smoothly now, almost peaceful. Ben leaned back, tension easing. Not gone, just quieter. You didn't treat me differently when you heard my name, he said. She smiled. Why would I? Well, he hesitated. People usually do. She considered that. I met you before the name, she said. I think that matters. He nodded slowly. Curiosity replaced caution, respect, softened resistance. They sat in a new kind of silence, not empty, not tense, just open. The flight continued, and for the first time, Ben didn't wish the seat beside him was empty. The hotel entrance glowed against the night like it expected admiration. Ben slowed as they stepped out of the car, his eyes lifting almost out of habit, scanning lines, lights, movement. This place was familiar to him. Too familiar. He knew how these evenings went before the doors even opened. Marianne stood beside him, still for a moment. Well, she murmured, barely louder than a breath. Ben glanced at her. Overwhelming? She shook her head slowly. No, just a lot. Valets moved quickly, doors opening and closing with smooth precision. Guests flowed toward the entrance in pairs and clusters, conversations already forming, laughter practiced and light. Marianne adjusted her purse strap, not nervously, more like grounding herself. Her shoulders stayed relaxed, her gaze steady. Ben noticed that. You don't look intimidated, he said. She smiled faintly. Why would I be? He exhaled through his nose. Most people are. First time anyway. They walked toward the doors together. The moment they crossed the threshold, the air changed. Cooler, quieter, carrying soft music that didn't demand attention but shaped the room anyway. Marianne paused again, eyes lifting briefly. The space was expansive. Clean lines, carefully chosen details. Everything spoke of intention and money without shouting. Ben waited for a reaction. What he saw instead was observation, appreciation, not awe. Huh, she said softly. They've thought this through. That made him laugh under his breath. That's one way to put it. People turned as they entered. Some nodded at Ben, recognition flickering in their expressions. Others smiled politely, unsure. Marianne noticed the glances, but didn't react to them. They moved forward. Ben felt it then, that subtle contrast he'd grown numb to over the years. Shoes that cost more than rent. Conversations that circled money without naming it. Confidence worn like a tailored jacket. He'd spent years blending into this environment. Marianne didn't try to. She didn't shrink either. As they reached the main ballroom, Ben caught himself slowing again, not for the room this time, but for her. She walked in like someone who had nothing to prove. The room filled gradually, conversations overlapping in a soft, constant hum. Servers moved with trays balanced easily, smiles practiced but not strained. Marianne accepted a glass of water with a polite nod. "No champagne?" Ben asked lightly. She smiled. "I like my thoughts clear." He nodded. "Fair." They drifted toward a small group near the edge of the room. Introductions were exchanged. Names, roles, titles. Marianne listened more than she spoke at first, head tilted slightly, eyes attentive. "And what brings you here tonight?" A woman asked her warmly. Marianne didn't hesitate. "My students," the woman blinked. "Oh, I teach 3rd grade," Marianne said. "A few of my kids are part of programs supported here." "That's wonderful," the woman replied, genuine surprise softening her voice. Marianne smiled. "They're the reason I came. No embellishment. No explanation beyond what mattered." Ben watched the exchange, something in his chest shifting. Another conversation followed, then another. Marianne moved through the room with ease, not because she belonged to this world, but because she refused to let it define her worth. Ben murmured at one point, leaning closer, "You're doing better than some of my board members." She laughed quietly. "That's not a high bar." He chuckled despite himself. At one table, someone asked about her work. She spoke plainly about classrooms, about attention spans, about patience and hope, and showing up even when days felt long. People listened, not politely, actually listened. Ben noticed how often heads nodded, how often questions followed. No one interrupted her. She didn't rush her words, didn't overstate, didn't downplay. She stood exactly where she was. At one point, Ben caught sight of his reflection in a mirrored panel, him in his tailored suit, her beside him, composed and unassuming. The contrast struck him, not uncomfortably, just clearly. He leaned closer. "You ever feel out of place in rooms like this?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but feeling out of place doesn't mean you don't belong." He nodded slowly. "Most people confuse those two." "Well," she said, smiling slightly, "most people don't question it." As the room continued to fill, Ben realized something he hadn't expected. Marianne wasn't navigating the space. The space was adjusting to her. Ben hadn't planned to drift. Usually, at events like this, he stayed anchored, one conversation leading neatly into the next, each exchange purposeful, efficient. Tonight, though, he found himself stepping back, lingering near the edges of conversations instead of leading them, watching. Marianne stood near a high table now, speaking with a man in a dark suit whose voice carried just enough authority to suggest he was used to being heard. Ben recognized him immediately, one of the Foundation's longtime donors, someone who liked results more than stories. Marianne didn't know that. She didn't need to. "Well," the man said, swirling his drink slightly, "metrics are important. Impact needs to be measurable." Marianne nodded. "I agree." Ben's brow lifted slightly. "But," she added after a brief pause, "numbers don't always tell you who stayed late to help a classmate, or who finally believed they were capable of more." The man hesitated. Marianne continued, not pressing, just explaining. "I see the impact every day. Sometimes it shows up in test scores. Sometimes it shows up in confidence." She shrugged lightly. "Both matter." Ben watched the donor's posture change, not dramatically, just enough to show he was thinking. The man said, "That's a fair point." Ben exhaled slowly. She wasn't performing. She wasn't pitching. She was telling the truth. As the conversation wrapped up, Marianne thanked him and stepped away gracefully. She didn't linger, didn't wait for approval. Ben caught her eye from across the room. She smiled briefly, like she was checking in, then turned her attention elsewhere. He felt something tighten in his chest. Curiosity, maybe. Respect, definitely. Another group formed nearby. Executives this time. Familiar faces. Ben half expected Marianne to hesitate. She didn't. She joined naturally, listening first, then adding a comment about classroom resources, about how access mattered more than aesthetics. Someone laughed softly. "You're refreshingly direct." She smiled. "I don't have time to be anything else." Ben shook his head slightly, a quiet laugh escaping him. "Well, he murmured to himself. That's new." He couldn't remember the last time someone in this room had spoken without calculating the response first. Marianne moved again, fluid, unhurried. She wasn't chasing attention. It followed her anyway. Ben realized something then, something that unsettled him. He trusted her. Not because he'd known her long, but because she hadn't tried to be anything she wasn't. And in rooms like this, that was rare. The lights dimmed slightly near the stage. A soft cue, subtle, familiar. Ben straightened instinctively as the music faded, the low murmur of conversation tapering off into expectant quiet. He checked the program in his hand, though he already knew the order. This was his part. He made his way toward the stage, steps measured, expression composed. Applause followed him, polite, warm, expected. Marianne watched from her spot near the aisle. She hadn't realized how close the stage felt until he stepped onto it. Ben adjusted the microphone, fingers steady despite the weight pressing behind his ribs. He scanned the room, eyes moving automatically across faces he recognized, faces he didn't. Then his gaze found her. She stood still, hands folded loosely, eyes attentive but calm. Ben cleared his throat. "Well," he began, the word landing softer than usual. "Thank you all for being here tonight." The room settled further. He spoke about the foundation at first, about programs, progress, responsibility. The words came easily. They always did. But then he paused, just a beat too long. Marianne noticed his shoulders rise slightly as he inhaled. Ben hadn't planned this part. "I want to share something," he said slowly. "Something that happened today." A few heads tilted. He glanced at Marianne again. "This morning," he continued, "I boarded a flight expecting it to be like any other. Routine." A faint ripple of interest moved through the room. "I didn't expect to sit next to someone who would remind me why this work matters." Marianne's breath caught. Ben felt it. The shift. The room leaning in. He swallowed. "She didn't know who I was," he said. "She didn't treat me differently. She talked about children, about classrooms, about showing up even when it's hard." The silence deepened. "She reminded me," Ben added, voice tightening just slightly, "that impact isn't abstract. It's personal." Marianne's hands tightened together. Ben exhaled, steadying himself. "Marianne, would you stand?" Every muscle in her body resisted the instinct to shrink. She stood. The room turned toward her. Ben looked at her, really looked at her. "You represent the reason we do this," he said. "Not the money, not the titles, the people." The applause came quickly, louder than before, more sincere. Marianne felt heat rise to her face. She nodded once, unsure what else to do. Ben stepped back from the microphone, heart pounding, not from fear but from exposure. This wasn't strategy. This was truth. And as the applause filled the room, both of them understood something clearly. Whatever had started on that flight had now followed them here, into the open, into the light, with no easy way back. The applause didn't stop right away. It swelled instead, rolling through the ballroom in waves, some people clapping out of courtesy at first, others catching on as they looked from Ben to Marianne and back again. Marianne stood there, still, not frozen, just momentarily unsure where to put herself. "Well," she whispered under her breath, then stopped. Her hands tightened together before she consciously relaxed them. She lifted her chin slightly, offering a polite smile, the kind she'd perfected over years of standing in front of classrooms when attention turned suddenly her way. Ben watched her from the stage. For a second, just a second, he wondered if he'd gone too far. This wasn't in the program. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't safe. The microphone stood inches from his mouth, still warm from his words, but he didn't reach for it again. He didn't need to. What he'd said was already out there. The room slowly settled, applause tapering into murmurs. A few people leaned toward each other, whispering. Heads nodded. Expressions softened. Marianne remained standing until the clapping fully faded, then sat back down, heart thudding. She exhaled carefully. Okay. Breathe. Ben stepped away from the podium, his movements automatic now, practiced from years of doing this. He took his seat at the head table, posture composed, expression neutral. Inside, though, nothing felt neutral. Someone leaned toward him immediately. That was powerful, they whispered. He nodded politely. Thank you, another voice chimed in. Unplanned, but effective. Ben didn't respond. Effective wasn't the word he would have chosen. Across the room, Marianne felt eyes on her again. Not curious now, but attentive. Different. A woman approached her table, smiling warmly. That was beautiful. Marianne blinked. Oh, thank you. You didn't know he was going to do that, did you? Marianne shook her head softly. No. The woman laughed lightly. Well, it showed. Marianne smiled back, but her fingers curled slightly under the table. She wasn't embarrassed. She was exposed. Ben excused himself a few minutes later, navigating the room with practiced ease, but his focus stayed fixed. He found her near the edge of the ballroom, standing alone now, gaze drifting toward the windows. He stopped to step away. Hey, he said quietly. She turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Well, Marianne began, then stopped, shaking her head slightly. I didn't expect that. He nodded. I know. A pause settled between them, thicker than before. I hope I didn't overstep, he added. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. She studied his face, really studied it this time. The tension around his eyes, the faint tightness in his jaw, the honesty that hadn't been there earlier on the flight. I wasn't upset, she said. Just surprised. He exhaled slowly. Good. Another pause. You didn't have to say my name, she added gently. I wanted to, he replied. She hesitated. Why? He didn't answer right away. Because, he said finally, I spend a lot of time talking about impact. Tonight was the first time in a while it felt real. Marianne looked away, processing that. The music shifted subtly in the background, signaling the transition to the next part of the evening. Plates clinked. Conversations resumed, but something between them had changed. You know, she said quietly, people will start asking questions now. He nodded. They already are. That doesn't bother you? He considered that. It should, he said. But it doesn't. She glanced back at him. You're used to controlling the narrative. Yes. And tonight, he gave a faint smile. Tonight, I let it go. Marianne studied him again, something thoughtful passing through her expression. That's not easy, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. They stood there, close enough now that neither felt the need to create space. A man approached Ben, interrupting gently. We need you for a moment. Ben nodded, then looked back at Marianne. I'll be right back. She smiled faintly. Take your time. As he walked away, Marianne let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She hadn't come here to be seen. She hadn't come here to be acknowledged publicly. She'd come for the kids, for the work, for the quiet belief that showing up mattered. And yet, here she was. Ben returned several minutes later, expression slightly more serious. Everything okay? She asked. Yes, he said. Just consequences. She tilted her head. Good ones or complicated ones? He let out a soft laugh. Both. They shared a look then, one that didn't need explanation. The night moved forward. Speeches continued. Conversations shifted, but the earlier moment lingered, hanging over everything like a quiet aftershock. For Ben, the exposure hadn't weakened him. It had grounded him. For Marianne, the attention hadn't lifted her. It had tested her. And as the gala carried on, both of them understood something clearly now. This wasn't just a collision of worlds. It was the beginning of a question neither of them had planned to ask. What happens when private truth enters a public space and refuses to leave? The ballroom kept moving even after the moment passed. Music resumed its gentle rhythm. Conversations rose again, lighter now, as if nothing significant had just happened. Plates were cleared, glasses refilled. The night pressed on, indifferent. Marianne felt suddenly aware of how loud it all was. She shifted her weight, fingers brushing the edge of the table beside her. Her chest felt tight, not uncomfortable, just full. Like she'd been holding something in and hadn't realized how heavy it was until now. Ben noticed before she said anything. "You want some air?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, surprised at how quickly the answer came. "Yes," she said. Then, softer, "I think I do." They didn't announce it, didn't explain themselves to anyone nearby. Ben nodded once toward the side of the room, and Marianne followed as they slipped past clusters of conversation and polite laughter. The hallway outside the ballroom felt different immediately. Quieter, cooler, less demanding. Marianne slowed her steps without meaning to, heels clicking faintly against the floor. She let out a breath, long, careful. "Well," she murmured, shaking her head slightly. "That was a lot." Ben smiled faintly. That's one way to describe it. They walked in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't press for words. The doors at the end of the hall led to an outdoor terrace. Ben pushed one open gently. Night air rushed in. Marianne stepped out first, instinctively wrapping her arms loosely around herself. Not cold, just adjusting. The city stretched out below them, lights scattered in uneven patterns, distant traffic humming like a low, steady breath. She leaned lightly against the railing. "This helps," she said. Ben joined her, resting his hands on the rail a few inches away. "Not too close, not too far." "I figured," he replied. The sounds of the gala faded behind them, replaced by the softer rhythm of the city at night. Somewhere below, laughter drifted up, distant and unimportant. Marianne stared out at the view, eyes unfocused. "I didn't plan for any of that," she said finally. "I know," Ben said. "Neither did I." She glanced at him. "You sure?" He let out a quiet laugh. "If I had planned it, I would have rehearsed, or second-guessed it into silence." She smiled faintly at that. They stood there, shoulders angled toward each other now. A subtle shift neither commented on. The distance felt intentional, comfortable. Marianne exhaled again, slower this time. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For noticing," she replied. "When it got overwhelming." Ben nodded. "You notice people when you spend enough time trying not to be noticed yourself." She turned toward him then. "Is that what you do?" He hesitated. "Well," he said, eyes drifting back toward the city. "Something like that." A pause settled between them. Not awkward, just open. Marianne broke the silence first. "You didn't talk about them tonight," she said gently. Ben knew who she meant. He rested his forearms on the railing, gaze fixed somewhere far away. "I usually don't." "Why?" He shrugged. "Because once you do, people stop seeing you. They see the loss instead." She considered that. "And you don't want that?" "No," he said quietly. "I don't." Another pause. The night breeze stirred her hair slightly. She tucked a strand behind her ear, then stopped herself from fidgeting. "I get that," she said. "In a different way." He glanced at her. "How so?" She hesitated, eyes dropping briefly before lifting again. "I've loved before," she said. Learned not to build my life around it. Ben studied her expression. That sounds like there's a story there. She smiled faintly. There usually is. She took a breath. I was younger, certain, convinced that effort alone could fix anything. He nodded. That belief doesn't disappear quietly. No, she agreed. It leaves marks. They stood there, both aware of how much they weren't saying. After it ended, she continued, I realized I'd been shrinking parts of myself to make room for someone who didn't know how to hold them. Ben's jaw tightened. That's familiar. She looked at him again. You loved? Deeply? Yes, he said. No hesitation this time. I still do. The honesty in his voice sat heavy between them. I don't think loss teaches you how to stop loving, he added. It just teaches you how much it can cost. Marianne nodded slowly. And yet, you're still here. He exhaled. Against my better judgment. She smiled softly at that, not amused, understanding. Being here doesn't mean you're ready, she said. It just means you're human. Ben turned toward her fully now. You don't scare easily, do you? She shook her head. I do. I just don't let it make my choices for me anymore. He absorbed that in silence. The city lights below flickered, distant and constant. I don't know what I'm doing, Ben admitted finally. Marianne met his gaze. Neither do I. That answer surprised him. You seem like you always do, he said. She smiled, small and honest. I seem that way because I've learned to pause before reacting, not because I have answers. He nodded slowly. They stood there a while longer, two people shaped by love and loss in different ways, neither trying to rush the moment into something else. The night held them gently, and for the first time, neither felt the need to step back. The night stretched on without asking anything of them. That, somehow, made it easier. Marianne rested her elbows lightly on the railing now, shoulders angled toward Ben. Not close enough to touch, close enough to feel the space between them narrowing. She cleared her throat. This is unexpected. Ben glanced at her. You don't like surprises? I like them, she said. I just don't usually meet them on airplanes. He smiled at that, then let the smile fade. Neither do I. A pause followed. Comfortable, fragile. Well, Marianne began, then stopped. She shook her head slightly, lips pressing together as if she were deciding how honest to be. Ben waited. I didn't come here expecting to feel anything, she said finally. Not like this. His chest tightened, not unpleasantly, just aware. I came for the work, she continued. For the kids, for the cause. I didn't plan on. She gestured vaguely between them. This, Ben nodded slowly. I didn't plan on it either. He leaned back against the railing, hands braced behind him, eyes lifting briefly toward the sky. I stopped expecting things a while ago, he said. Feels safer that way. She studied his profile. The tension he carried, even when he tried to relax. The way his words came carefully now, as if each one had to be weighed. And yet, she said softly, here you are. He exhaled. Yeah. Another pause. Marianne turned fully toward him. I don't know what this is, she said. But I know I don't want to pretend I don't feel it. Ben met her gaze. The city lights reflected faintly in his eyes. What do you feel? She hesitated. Not because she didn't know, because saying it made it real. I feel seen, she said quietly. And that doesn't happen often in spaces like this, or with people like you. He absorbed that, jaw tightening slightly. I feel... He began, then stopped. He let out a slow breath. I feel like I'm standing somewhere. I told myself I wouldn't stand again. Her heart thudded. And? She asked. And I don't hate it, he admitted. That's what scares me. She smiled faintly. Fear doesn't always mean stop. He looked at her, searching her face. What does it mean to you? It means pay attention, she replied. Not run. The air between them shifted. Not charged, not dramatic, just honest. Ben stepped a fraction closer without realizing it. Marianne didn't move away. They stood there, close enough now that silence felt heavier. I don't want to rush this, he said. Neither do I, she replied. Another pause. But I also don't want to pretend it's nothing, he added. Marianne nodded once. Agreed. No promises followed. Just acknowledgement. And somehow, that felt like enough, for now. The city hummed below them, steady and indifferent. Marianne became suddenly aware of how close Ben was. Not touching, not yet, but near enough that she could feel the warmth from his body, the quiet energy of him standing there, undecided. She swallowed. Well, she said softly, almost a laugh. This is the part where people usually overthink things. Ben huffed quietly. I've already done enough of that for one night. She met his eyes again. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Ben spoke, voice low. May I? The simplicity of the question made her chest tighten. Yes, she said, just as simply. He hesitated anyway, just long enough to be sure. Then he leaned in. The kiss was gentle, careful, brief, at first, not fireworks, not fantasy. It felt like relief, like two people letting go of tension they'd been holding without naming. Marianne's hand rose instinctively, resting lightly against his chest, not pulling him closer, just grounding herself in the moment. Ben's breath shuddered against hers as he pulled back slightly, forehead resting near hers. Okay, he whispered. She smiled faintly. Okay. They stood there, breaths uneven, the moment settling into something quieter than expectation. Ben stepped back first, not retreating, respecting. I don't want this to mean more than it can hold, he said honestly. Marianne nodded. Neither do I. She reached out, brushing her fingers briefly against his hand before letting go. But I don't regret it, she added. He smiled. Me neither. They stood side by side again. The space between them changed. Not smaller, just different. The night didn't rush them. The city didn't care. And that was exactly what made it feel real. They didn't rush back inside. Not right away. Marianne rested her forearms on the railing again, gaze drifting toward the city as if it might offer guidance. Ben stood beside her, hands in his pockets now, shoulders squared but not tense. The kiss lingered, not on their lips, but in the quiet that followed. Well, Marianne said softly, drawing out the word before letting it fall away. That just happened. Ben let out a low breath, almost a laugh. Yeah. Neither of them smiled right away. The moment didn't ask for celebration. It asked for honesty. Marianne shifted her weight, heels scraping lightly against the terrace floor. I don't want this to turn into something. It isn't. Ben nodded immediately. Me neither. She glanced at him. You didn't even let me finish. I know, he said. I don't want assumptions filling the space where truth should be. That mattered to her. She folded her arms loosely, not closed off, just thinking. I don't do well with expectations I didn't agree to. He met her gaze. I don't do well with expectations at all. A pause followed, not awkward, measured. I meant what I said earlier, he continued. I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. Marianne nodded slowly. I appreciate that. She leaned back against the railing, tilting her head slightly. I've learned that uncertainty isn't the enemy. Avoidance is. Ben considered that, lips pressing together briefly. I've been avoiding things for a long time, he admitted. Calling it caution. She smiled faintly. Those two look similar from the outside, and feel very different on the inside, he replied. Another pause. The city lights flickered below them, steady and distant, like the world moving on without waiting for clarity. Marianne breathed in deeply, then out. I don't want to rush this into meaning. I don't want to shrink it into nothing, Ben said. She nodded. That feels fair. They stood there for a moment longer, neither reaching for the other, neither stepping away. It would have been easy to fill the space with reassurance. Neither of them did. Eventually, Ben spoke again. We should probably go back in. Marianne smiled softly. Probably. Neither moved. He glanced toward the door, then back at her. You okay? She considered the question seriously. I am, she said. Just aware. He nodded. Same. They walked back inside together, not touching, not distant, just aligned enough to share the same direction. The ballroom greeted them with sound and light again. Conversations resumed around them, as if the terrace hadn't existed at all. Marianne adjusted her posture, slipping back into herself easily. Ben did the same, composure returning in familiar layers. They blended in again. But something had shifted. A woman stopped Marianne briefly, complimenting her on the earlier moment. Marianne thanked her politely, then excused herself. Ben watched from a few steps away, resisting the instinct to step in. When they regrouped near the edge of the room, Ben spoke quietly. "You handled that well." She shrugged lightly. "I'm used to classrooms." He smiled. "That explains a lot." The night continued. Speeches wrapped up. Plates were cleared. Guests began drifting toward exits in ones and twos. Marianne checked the time, then looked up at Ben. "I should head out soon." He nodded, unsurprised. "I'll walk you to the car." They moved through the crowd together, unhurried. At the entrance, the night air greeted them again, cooler now. They stopped near the curb. "Well," Marianne said, fingers brushing her purse strap. "Thank you for tonight." "For coming?" he asked. "For being honest," she replied. He nodded. "Thank you for not asking me to be anything else." A pause settled. Not heavy, just unresolved. She met his eyes. "We don't have to decide anything tonight." Relief flickered across his face. "I was hoping you'd say that." She smiled, small but genuine. They stood there for another moment, neither leaning in this time. Then Marianne stepped back slightly. "Good night, Ben." "Good night, Marianne." She turned and walked toward the waiting car, posture steady, steps confident. Ben watched until the door closed, until the car pulled away and merged into the street. He exhaled slowly. No promises, no labels, no certainty, just the awareness that something real had begun, not loudly, not dramatically, but honestly, and that was enough to let the question linger. For now. Sunday morning arrived quietly. No gala lights, no polished speeches, no schedule written in ink. Marianne stood in her kitchen tying her shoes, movements unhurried, the kind that came from routine rather than urgency. Sunlight filtered in through the window, catching dust in the air, warming the room just enough to feel lived in. She checked the time on her phone. Ben would be here soon. The thought made her pause. "Well," she murmured, straightening, then stopping herself. She hadn't planned to invite him so quickly, or maybe she had, without fully admitting it. It wasn't a test, she knew that much. It was an offering. When the knock came, she didn't rush. She walked to the door, opened it, and smiled. "Morning," Ben said. He looked different today. No suit, no pressed perfection. Just clean lines, neutral colors, hands tucked briefly into his pockets like he wasn't sure what to do with them. "Morning," she replied. "You came?" He nodded. "I said I would." A beat passed. "And," he added, "I wanted to." That mattered. They walked to the car together. The drive was quiet, not heavy, just thoughtful. Ben watched the neighborhoods change as they moved farther from the city center. Less glass, more porches, kids on bikes, people walking dogs like they weren't racing time. "This is different," he said. Marianne smiled. "That's one word for it." She parked near a modest building with an open entrance. Nothing grand, nothing hidden. Just doors wide enough to suggest you were welcome. Ben stayed in the car a moment longer. Marianne noticed, but didn't comment. "You don't have to come in," she said gently. "I won't be offended." He exhaled. "No, I want to see it." They stepped out together. Inside, the air felt warm, not temperature-wise, but in tone. Voices overlapped. Laughter bounced softly off walls. Someone called Marianne's name before they'd even taken 3 steps. "There you are," a woman said, pulling her into a brief hug. Marianne laughed. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson." Ben stood back instinctively. Marianne turned. "This is Ben." Mrs. Thompson smiled immediately. "Well, we're glad you're here." No questions, no background check. Just that. Ben blinked, caught off guard. Thank you, he said. Marianne glanced at him as they found seats. You okay? He nodded slowly. Yeah, just observing. That's allowed, she said. The room filled gradually. Music began. Not polished, not restrained. Real voices. Real sound. Ben sat stiffly at first, hands folded, posture alert. He wasn't uncomfortable exactly, just unsure where to place himself. Marianne noticed and leaned slightly closer. You don't have to do anything, she whispered. Just be. He nodded. For once, that felt possible. Ben had attended conferences in rooms twice this size. Rooms filled with quiet authority, minimal movement. People waiting to speak only when invited. This wasn't that. Here, people spoke freely, sang without concern for perfection, responded in real time. Laughter, murmurs, nods. It unsettled him, not unpleasantly. Just unfamiliar. Well, he murmured under his breath as the music swelled. Marianne smiled at his reaction, but kept her eyes forward. The pastor spoke next, not from a script, not with distance. He spoke like someone who knew the room personally. Ben listened, arms crossed loosely now. Not defensive, just thoughtful. No one talked about success. No one mentioned money. People talked about showing up, about carrying each other, about faith that didn't need an audience. Ben shifted in his seat. In his world, belief was strategic. Values were branding. Words were chosen for impact. Here, words were chosen for meaning. Someone behind them leaned forward slightly. You knew? Ben turned. Yeah. The man smiled. Glad you're here. That was it. No follow-up. No curiosity disguised as politeness. Ben leaned back, letting the sound wash over him. His shoulders relaxed incrementally as the service continued. Marianne sang quietly beside him, not loudly, not performatively, just present. He watched her, noticing how different she looked here. Not more confident, just more herself. The service ended not with applause, but conversation. People moved naturally, greeting each other, checking in. Marianne stood, stretching slightly. Come on. Ben followed. They walked through the room slowly. Hands were shaken, names exchanged. Ben lost count of how many times he heard, "So glad you're here." No one asked what he did. No one asked who he knew. At one point, he leaned toward Marianne. Does no one here care about status? She smiled. Not the way you mean. That landed. As they stepped outside afterward, Ben paused at the doorway, taking one last look back. This feels honest, he said quietly. Marianne nodded. That's why I love it. He breathed in deeply, then out. Yeah, he said. I can see that. Ben didn't realize how tightly he'd been holding himself together until someone hugged him. It wasn't abrupt or invasive, just a brief, natural embrace from an older man with a soft laugh and an easy smile. Good to meet you, the man said, patting Ben's shoulder like they'd known each other for years. Ben stiffened out of instinct, then forced himself to relax. Nice to meet you too, he replied. Marianne caught it, the way his shoulders locked, then slowly dropped. She didn't comment, just stayed close enough to anchor him without crowding. They moved toward a long table, where people gathered casually, plates appearing as if by muscle memory. Food was passed, chairs scraped. Conversations overlapped in comfortable chaos. Ben hovered at the edge at first. Well, he murmured, watching as someone handed him a plate without ceremony. This is generous. Marianne smiled. No one keeps score here. That was new. A woman asked him where he was from. He answered simply. Another asked if he liked the service. He nodded. Someone else cracked a joke about parking. No one pressed. No one evaluated. Ben found himself answering honestly because there was no incentive not to. At one point, he laughed, an actual laugh, short and surprised, as if it had slipped out without permission. He froze for a second. Marianne noticed and raised an eyebrow, amused. Did that just happen? She whispered. He shook his head slightly. Don't make a big deal out of it. She smiled and let it go. A child ran past them, nearly colliding with Ben before darting away again, apologizing loudly. Ben stepped back instinctively, then stopped himself. He smiled. It felt strange, being part of something without needing to control it. As the afternoon stretched on, Ben realized something else. No one was asking him to open up. They were simply letting him be present. That disarmed him more than pressure ever could. When Marianne stepped away briefly to help clean up, Ben remained standing by the table, hands resting loosely at his sides. Mrs. Thompson reappeared beside him. "You look thoughtful," she said. He nodded. "I am." She smiled gently. "That happens here." He hesitated. "Why does this place feel so steady?" She considered the question. "Because people come as they are, not as they're expected to be." Ben swallowed. That landed deeper than he wanted it to. When Marianne returned, he leaned slightly toward her. "Your community's something," she smiled softly. "They saved me more times than they know." He looked around again, seeing the room differently now, not as an outsider observing, but as someone beginning to feel included. His armor hadn't shattered. It had simply loosened, and that felt more unsettling and more relieving than he'd expected. They left the church together, the afternoon sun warmer now, the air filled with quiet weekend sounds. Marianne unlocked her car, then paused. "Well," she said, glancing at Ben. "There's one more thing." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." She laughed softly. "Not like that." She hesitated. "My family's nearby. They're having lunch. You don't have to come." Ben looked at her. He could hear the unspoken weight behind the invitation. This wasn't casual. This wasn't polite. This mattered. He exhaled slowly. "I'll come." Her smile was immediate, but restrained, appreciative. The house was modest, welcoming, with voices audible before the door even opened. Laughter spilled out, familiar and loud in a way that felt earned. Marianne stepped inside first. "Hey!" someone called. Her mother appeared almost instantly, pulling her into a hug. "There you are." Then she noticed Ben. Marianne stepped aside slightly. "This is Ben." Her mother studied him for a brief moment, sharp eyes, kind face, then smiled. "Well, come on in," she said. "Anyone Marianne brings home is welcome." Ben blinked at the phrasing. "Brings home." That word landed unexpectedly. He nodded. "Thank you, Mom." "Please," she said, waving a hand. "Call me Linda." The house filled around him quickly. Cousins, aunts, someone asking if he was hungry, someone else asking if he'd driven far. Marianne stayed near him, not hovering, just present. He answered questions honestly, briefly. No resume, no explanations. At one point, Linda leaned toward Marianne. "He seems nice." Marianne smiled. "He is." Ben pretended not to hear. They sat at the table together, plates passed easily, conversation bouncing naturally. Ben listened more than he spoke, absorbing the rhythm of it all. This wasn't curated. This wasn't strategic. It was messy and warm and unapologetically real. Marianne caught him watching her interact with her family, the ease in her laughter, the way she softened here. "What?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Just seeing you." She smiled, a little shy now. "This is me." He nodded. "I know." As they stood to leave later, Linda hugged Marianne again, then surprised Ben by doing the same. "Come back any time," she said. Ben stood still for a second after she let go. "I will," he said, surprising himself. Outside, they walked slowly toward the car. "You okay?" Marianne asked. He took a breath. "Yeah, just recalibrating." She smiled. "That happens around my family." He glanced back at the house once more. Something had shifted again, not dramatically, not loudly, but undeniably. This wasn't just a visit, it was an introduction, and Ben felt the weight of that settle quietly into his chest. The drive back was quiet. Not the awkward kind, the thoughtful kind, where words feel unnecessary and silence doesn't ask to be filled. Ben watched the neighborhood slide past the window, houses spaced comfortably apart, trees lining the street like they'd been there long before anyone asked them to. He rested his elbow on the door, fingers lightly touching the glass, feeling the faint vibration of the road. Marianne drove with both hands on the wheel, posture relaxed, eyes steady. "Well," Ben said at last, then stopped. He shook his head slightly. "I'm not sure how to put this." Marianne didn't look at him. "You don't have to," she said. "You can just say it when it finds its shape." He nodded, appreciating that. They stopped at a red light. Somewhere nearby, a radio played softly through an open window, music he didn't recognize, but it sounded familiar anyway. "I don't think I've ever understood what people meant by home," Ben said finally. "Not really." Marianne glanced over briefly, then back to the road. "What did it mean to you?" He considered the question carefully. "A place I passed through. Somewhere I stayed between meetings, a base maybe, not a feeling." The light changed. The car moved again. "And today?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. Today felt different. She waited. "Not because it was perfect," he added, "but because no one was trying to impress anyone else. No one was watching for weakness." Marianne smiled faintly. "That's kind of the point." He nodded. "It made me realize how much of my life has been spent proving I belong in rooms that never really ask me to." They turned onto her street. The afternoon light slanted lower now, warmer, softer. Marianne parked and turned off the engine. The quiet settled again. Ben didn't move right away. "I've built my life around control," he said, voice lower now. "Schedules, outcomes, expectations. I thought that was safety." Marianne rested her hands in her lap, listening. "And today," he continued, "I walked into places where none of that mattered, and somehow I felt safer." She turned toward him fully then. "Safety doesn't always come from structure," she said. "Sometimes it comes from being known." He looked at her. "That's the part I don't know how to do yet." She smiled gently. "You don't have to know how, you just have to let it happen." A pause followed. Not hopeful, not heavy, just real. Ben nodded once. "I don't know where this leads." Marianne's smile softened. "Neither do I." He took a breath. "But I know I don't want to rush past what today meant." She reached out, resting her hand lightly on his forearm. Not to keep him, not to guide him, just to acknowledge the moment. "That's enough," she said. For now. They stepped out of the car together. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned at the end of a long day. Ben looked around, then back at her. "Thank you." "For today." She shrugged lightly. "You showed up. That was your part." He smiled. "I didn't know showing up could feel like this." She smiled back. "It doesn't always. But when it does, it stays with you." They stood there a moment longer, neither moving toward a goodbye just yet. "I should let you rest," he said. Marianne nodded. "You too." They shared a brief look. No tension, no urgency. Just understanding. As Ben walked back to his car, he glanced once more at the house, the street, the ordinary calm of it all. For the first time in a long while, the word home didn't feel abstract. It felt possible. Not claimed, not promised. Just possible. And as he drove away, that possibility stayed with him. Quiet, steady, and unforced. Love didn't arrive all at once. It showed up in small, almost forgettable ways. In mornings when Marianne texted Ben a picture of her coffee mug, chipped at the rim, with a simple thinking of you attached. In evenings when Ben called, not because he had something important to say, but because silence felt easier shared. "Well," he'd say sometimes, the word stretching out while he searched for nothing in particular. "I just wanted to hear your voice." Marianne would smile, settling into her couch, legs tucked under her. "You don't have to justify that." He'd laugh quietly. Old habit. They learned each other's rhythms slowly. Ben learned that Marianne hummed when she graded papers late at night, unaware she was doing it. Marianne learned that Ben walked his apartment every morning before work, phone in hand, grounding himself before the day started. They didn't label what they were doing. They didn't rush to define it. Instead, They let it exist. Some nights, Ben cooked, simple meals, nothing fancy, and ate with her at the small table in her kitchen. He'd wash dishes without being asked, sleeves rolled up, movements efficient but unshowy. "You don't have to do that," she'd say. "I know," he'd reply. "I want to." That mattered. Other days, Marianne showed up at his place with grocery bags and a quiet smile. She rearranged nothing, judged nothing, just existed in the space with him. Ben noticed how different it felt. Not like someone trying to fit into his life, more like someone willing to walk alongside it. They talked about work in pieces, about children in Marianne's class who surprised her, about meetings Ben dreaded, not because they were hard, but because they felt empty. "I used to love this," he admitted once, staring at the city through his window. The pace, the certainty. "And now?" she asked. He shrugged. "Now I love different things." She didn't push him to explain. That, too, mattered. They laughed easily, teased gently, shared space without filling every moment with sound. Sometimes Ben would catch himself watching her as she moved around his apartment, comfortable, unassuming, present, and feel a flicker of something like fear. Not because of her, because of how much peace she brought with her. He didn't say that out loud, not yet. The comments didn't start loudly. They never did. They slipped in sideways, wrapped in curiosity or concern, framed as harmless observations. Ben heard the first one at work. "So," a colleague said casually as they walked out of a meeting, "I hear you've been spending time outside your usual circles." Ben paused. "What's that supposed to mean?" The man shrugged. "Just unexpected, that's all." Ben let it go. Or thought he did. Another came later, over dinner with acquaintances he'd known for years. "She seems grounded," someone said carefully. "Different from who you usually date." Ben nodded. "She is." The pause that followed said more than words. At first, Marianne didn't hear any of it. Her world stayed steady. Classrooms, lesson plans, church, family dinners. Ben fit into it quietly, respectfully, never asking her to adjust herself to him. But eventually, the outside voices reached her too. A parent at school mentioned it casually. "I saw you at that big charity thing on the news." Marianne blinked. "Oh, yeah, that's quite a crowd." Marianne smiled politely. "People are people," the woman laughed, uncertain. Still, Marianne didn't respond. Later that week, a friend asked gently, "Are you sure you're comfortable with all that?" Marianne paused, hands resting on her steering wheel. "With what?" she asked. "With his world," the friend clarified. "It's very different from yours." Marianne considered the question honestly. "Well," she said slowly, "I'm comfortable with him." The answer surprised even her. Ben noticed the shift before she said anything. She grew quieter one evening, stirring her tea longer than necessary. "You okay?" he asked. She hesitated. "People have opinions." He sighed softly. "They always do." She looked up at him. "Does it bother you?" He thought about that longer than he expected to. "Yes," he said finally. "More than I want it to." The words hung between them, not accusatory, just true. They sat together in that truth, aware now that what they were building wasn't invisible anymore. And that visibility came with weight. Ben didn't start doubting Marianne. He started doubting himself. It crept in during quiet moments, when he was alone in his apartment, the city humming outside like it always did. When his phone stayed silent just a little longer than expected. When he replayed conversations in his head, looking for things that weren't there. "Well," he muttered one night, pacing slowly from window to kitchen and back again. "This is stupid." He stopped near the counter, resting his hands against the edge, shoulders tense. Nothing had gone wrong. That was the problem. In his world, calm usually meant something was about to break. He caught himself checking his phone again, thumb hovering before he locked the screen. He didn't want to be that person, the one who needed reassurance he hadn't earned. Marianne had never asked him to be anything other than present. And yet, at work, the pressure kept building. A colleague joked lightly during lunch. "Careful, Ben, you'll forget how the rest of us live." Ben forced a smile. "Funny." Another voice, later that week, quieter but sharper. "You sure this isn't a phase?" Ben didn't answer. He found himself working longer hours, not because the work demanded it, but because it felt familiar, predictable, safe. When Marianne noticed, she didn't accuse. "You've been tired lately," she said one evening as they sat on her couch, legs barely touching. "Work heavy?" He nodded. "Something like that." She studied him. "You don't have to carry it alone." The words were gentle. They still hit a nerve. "I'm not," he said quickly. Too quickly. She didn't challenge him. She just nodded slowly. That silence, that refusal to argue, made the doubt louder. Later that night, alone again, Ben sat on the edge of his bed, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed. "I don't belong in her world," he whispered. "And she doesn't belong in mine." The thought scared him, not because it felt true, but because it felt possible. He imagined being the reason things eventually broke, imagined disappointing her, imagined losing the calm she brought into his life. Fear wrapped itself around his chest, tight and familiar. He didn't know how to tell her, so instead he pulled back just a little. Not enough to cause a scene, just enough to protect himself. And that distance, small but intentional, shifted something between them. Marianne felt the change before she understood it. Ben still called, still showed up, still listened, but something in him had gone quiet. She noticed it in the way he hesitated before speaking, in the way his laughter didn't linger as long, in the way he seemed to brace himself when things felt easy. She didn't confront him right away. She waited, not because she was afraid, because she respected timing. One evening, as they walked slowly through a park near her place, leaves crunching softly underfoot, she finally spoke. "You've been somewhere else lately," she said. Ben stopped walking. He stared ahead, jaw tightening. "I'm right here." She turned toward him. Physically, he exhaled sharply. "I don't want to mess this up." There it was. She nodded once. "Then don't." He looked at her, frustration flickering. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," she said calmly. "It's just not easy." They stood there, streetlights casting soft circles around them. "I don't need perfection," she continued. "I need honesty." Ben swallowed. "I don't know how to be honest without sounding insecure." Marianne's expression didn't change. Insecurity isn't a failure, it's information. That stopped him. She stepped a little closer, not invading his space, just anchoring herself. "But," she added, "I won't shrink myself to make someone else feel safer." The boundary was clear, not sharp, not cruel, just firm. Ben felt it immediately, the difference between control and choice. "I don't want you to change," he said quietly. "Good," she replied. "Because I won't." Another pause. "You don't have to decide everything right now," she said. "But you do have to decide whether you're present." He nodded slowly. "I am," he said. "I'm just scared." She softened then, just a little. "I know." They resumed walking, steps slower now, more deliberate. Marianne didn't reassure him with promises. She didn't argue away his fears. She simply stayed, fully herself, fully present. And that steadiness forced Ben to face something uncomfortable. The problem wasn't their differences. It was his fear of losing something he hadn't learned how to trust. The days that followed didn't explode. They thinned. That was how Ben felt it first. Not as distance, but as something stretched. Conversations still happened. Plans still formed. But the space between moments grew longer, quieter, like pauses that waited to be filled, and then weren't. Marianne noticed too. She noticed when Ben answered her messages with care instead of ease. When his voice carried an extra layer of restraint, like he was choosing words the way one chooses steps across ice. carefully. "Hey," she said one evening, phone tucked between shoulder and ear as she packed her bag for the next day. "You're quiet." Ben stood in his kitchen, staring at nothing. "Just thinking." She paused. "About?" He hesitated. "Us." The word settled between them, heavier than it had ever been. "Well," she said softly, then stopped. She didn't rush to rescue the moment. "That's fair." A long silence followed. Ben leaned against the counter, closing his eyes. He could hear the city outside, sirens far away, the low hum of traffic, life continuing without regard for what he was holding inside his chest. "I'm scared," he admitted finally. Marianne didn't answer right away. She waited until the honesty landed. "Of what?" she asked gently. He swallowed. "Of losing you." Her breath caught, just slightly. "And," she prompted. "And of being the reason," he added. "Of getting this wrong. Of waking up one day and realizing I didn't know how to keep something good." She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. "That fear," she said, choosing her words carefully, "makes sense." He exhaled shakily. "It does?" "Yes," she replied. "It means you care. But caring doesn't stop things from ending," he said. "It just makes the ending hurt more." The truth of that sat heavy. Marianne set her bag down and leaned against the edge of her bed. "I can't promise you this won't end," she said quietly. "I won't pretend that's something anyone can guarantee." He nodded. "I know. But," she continued, "I also won't live as if loss is inevitable. That steals too much from the present." Another pause. Ben rubbed his forehead with his thumb, exhaustion seeping into his posture. "I don't know how to hold both." "Neither do I," she admitted. "I just know which one I refuse to let lead." Silence stretched again, longer this time. Ben pictured her sitting there, calm and grounded, not reaching through the phone to pull him closer, not pushing him away either. He realized something then. Her strength wasn't loud. It didn't argue with fear. It simply didn't obey it. "I don't want to lose what we have," he said. Marianne's voice softened. "Then don't abandon it before it asks you to." The words struck deep. After they hung up, Ben sat alone in the dark, phone resting on his chest, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the way Marianne moved through the world, present, honest, unwilling to contort herself into something smaller for comfort. He thought about how different that was from the rooms he'd built his life around. He also thought about the night everything in his life had changed years ago, the moment he'd learned that loving deeply came with a cost he hadn't been prepared to pay. Fear rose again, familiar and sharp, not of pain, of repetition. He didn't want to survive loss again, but he also didn't want to survive without living. The next time they saw each other, the tension was still there, not awkward, just awake. They met for coffee on a quiet afternoon. No rush, no grand gestures, just the table between them, warm mugs in hand. Marianne watched Ben carefully, noticing the way his shoulders stayed tight, the way he inhaled before speaking. "You don't have to fix this today," she said. He nodded. "I know. I just need to know you're here," she added. "Not half here. Not bracing for the exit." He met her gaze. "I'm trying." "I see that," she said. "But trying isn't the same as choosing." The distinction landed. Ben looked down at his coffee, then back up. "What if I choose, and it still ends?" Marianne didn't flinch. "Then we grieve honestly," she said. "Not from a place of regret, but from a place of having shown up." He stared at her, something raw crossing his face. "You're not afraid of that?" She thought about it. "I am," she said. "I just don't let it decide for me." The answer didn't soothe him. It challenged him. They sat there, the noise of the cafe soft around them, the world continuing its ordinary rhythm. Ben reached across the table, resting his hand near hers, but not touching. "I don't know if I'm ready," he said. Marianne didn't move her hand closer. She didn't move it away either. "Readiness isn't a feeling," she said quietly. "It's a willingness." Another pause. Ben withdrew his hand slowly, nodding to himself. That night, as Ben drove home, fear sat in the passenger seat beside him, silent, watchful, not screaming, not demanding, just present. And for the first time, he didn't know which scared him more, losing Marianne one day, or never fully choosing her at all. The uncertainty followed him into the dark, unresolved, uncomfortably alive. Marianne read the email 3 times before she let herself breathe. Once for the words, once for the meaning, once to be sure it was real. Her phone rested in her palm, screen glowing softly in the quiet of her living room. The afternoon light filtered through the window, catching the edges of the paper scattered across her table. Lesson plans, notes, reminders of a life rooted here. She sank onto the couch, slowly. "Well," she whispered, voice barely there. Her heart wasn't racing. That surprised her. She'd imagined this moment before, had allowed herself that much. A fellowship overseas, months of study, service, collaboration, a chance to deepen the work she cared about, to grow in ways she hadn't known how to ask for until now. And yet, her first thought wasn't excitement. It was Ben. She stared at the screen again, thumb hovering. The words "we are pleased to inform you" still sat there, quiet and undeniable. She set the phone down and pressed her palms together, grounding herself. Okay. Breathe. She'd applied before she met him, long before. Back when her life had felt contained, predictable. Back when choices didn't feel shared. Now, everything felt layered. She didn't call him right away. Not because she was hiding it, because she wanted to say it well. That evening, they sat together at her kitchen table, half-eaten dinner between them. Ben talked about a meeting that had gone longer than expected, about a decision that felt heavier than it should have. Marianne listened, nodding, smiling at the right moments. But her mind was elsewhere. Ben noticed. "You're quiet," he said, setting his fork down. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, just a fraction too long. "Well," she began, then stopped. She let out a slow breath. "I got an email today." His brow furrowed. "Good email or bad email?" "Important," she said honestly. He leaned back slightly. "Okay." She folded her hands together, steadying herself. "I applied for something a while back. Before we met." Ben nodded. "You've mentioned that. I didn't expect it to go anywhere," she continued. "I almost forgot about it, actually." The room felt suddenly smaller. "And?" he asked. She met his eyes. "I got accepted." A pause. Ben blinked. "Accepted into an overseas fellowship," she said softly. The word overseas settled between them like a held breath. "Oh," he said, not angry, not yet, just unprepared. "It's for educators," she added quickly, "focused on community development and learning systems. It's something I've wanted for a long time." He nodded slowly, processing. "How long?" he asked. She hesitated again. "Several months." Another pause. "And when?" he asked. "In the fall." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded, with questions, with fear, with everything neither of them had said out loud yet. Ben leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped loosely. "You didn't tell me you were waiting on this." "I didn't know if it would happen," she replied gently. "And I didn't want to make decisions based on possibilities." He nodded. "That makes sense." But his jaw tightened. She saw it. "This doesn't mean I've decided anything yet," she said quickly. I wanted you to know." He sat back, running a hand through his hair. "Okay," he said. "Okay." But his voice didn't match the word. Ben didn't speak for a while. Marianne waited. She watched him retreat inward, the way he did when something hit too close to the core. His shoulders stiffened. His gaze dropped to the table. Finally, he laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Well," he said, exhaling. "That's unexpected." "I know," she replied. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Today," she said. "I wanted to tell you in person." He nodded again, but this time his movements were sharper, controlled. "And you're considering it," he said. "Yes." The word landed heavy. Ben stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. He paced once, then twice, stopping near the counter. So you'd just go? He asked. For months? Marianne stood too, not matching his pace, just anchoring herself. It wouldn't be just going, it would be intentional. Planned without me. He shot back before he could stop himself. The room went still. Marianne inhaled slowly. This isn't about leaving you, but it is, he said, turning toward her now. That's exactly what it is. She shook her head. It's about growth, about calling, about distance, he interrupted, about time zones and missed calls and uncertainty. His voice tightened. I just got used to you being here, he added. To us figuring this out. Marianne's chest ached at the honesty in that. I didn't plan this to hurt you, she said quietly. I know, he replied. That's the problem. He ran a hand down his face, frustration rising. Do you have any idea what it feels like to finally let someone in, and then hear they might leave? Her voice softened. Ben, this isn't abandonment. His eyes flashed. It feels like it. There it was. Fear, no longer contained. I've lost people before, he continued, words tumbling out now. I know how this goes. Distance turns into silence. Silence turns into absence. She stepped closer, careful. You're projecting. Maybe, he snapped. Then quieter. But I'm not wrong. She stopped moving. I won't live my life governed by fear, she said calmly. He stared at her. Easy to say when you're the one choosing. The words hurt. She felt them land, but she didn't raise her voice. This isn't me choosing against you, she said. It's me choosing to be honest about who I am. And where does that leave me? He asked. The question wasn't accusatory. It was wounded. Marianne swallowed. That's what we need to talk about. Ben turned away, hands gripping the counter now. I can't do this again, he said. I can't sit here waiting for the moment something pulls you farther away. She felt the distance between them stretch, no longer physical but emotional. I didn't ask you to wait, she said. I asked you to listen. He shook his head. I don't know how to listen to something that scares me this much. The silence that followed was thick, fragile. Marianne stood there, heart heavy, realizing something painful. Fear had stepped between them. And for the first time, it wasn't something they were facing together. The silence didn't cool anything down. It sharpened it. Marianne stood near the table, hands resting against the edge, grounding herself. Ben remained by the counter, back half-turned, shoulders tense like he was bracing for impact that had already happened. Well, Marianne said quietly, then stopped. She pressed her lips together, recalibrating. This isn't going the way I hoped. Ben laughed under his breath. You hoped this would be easy? No, she replied. I hoped we could talk without hurting each other. He turned toward her, eyes flashing, not with anger, but with something closer to panic. You dropped a life-changing decision into the middle of my day and expected calm. I expected honesty, she said, from both of us. He shook his head. That's not fair. What's not fair, she replied, voice steady, is turning fear into accusation. His jaw clenched. I didn't accuse you of anything. You implied I was choosing myself over us. He hesitated. That pause said everything. Marianne exhaled slowly. Ben, I am allowed to have a calling, and I'm allowed to be scared of losing you, he shot back. Yes, she said immediately. You are. But fear doesn't get to decide what I'm allowed to pursue. Her words landed like a boundary, not a challenge. Ben took a step toward her, then stopped. You're talking like this is already decided. I'm talking like I'm allowed to consider it. He ran a hand through his hair again, frustration rising. That consideration has consequences. So does staying still, she replied. The room felt suddenly too small. You don't understand what distance does, Ben said, voice lowering. It breaks things. Distance reveals things, Marianne countered. It doesn't automatically destroy them. That's easy to believe when you haven't lived through it, he said sharply. She stiffened. That's not fair, she said quietly. Ben froze. He hadn't meant to cross that line, but he had. Marianne's voice stayed calm, but something essential shifted. You don't get to decide what I've survived. The words landed heavy. Ben swallowed. I didn't mean... I know, she interrupted gently. But meaning well doesn't undo harm. Silence returned. This one felt different, not thoughtful. Fragile. Ben backed away slightly, like he just realized how close he was to losing ground. I'm trying to protect us. Marianne shook her head. You're trying to protect yourself. The truth of it hurt them both. Ben looked at her, eyes searching. Can you honestly say this doesn't change things? She nodded slowly. It changes things, but change isn't the same as loss. He let out a shaky breath. You speak like you're not afraid. I am afraid, she admitted. I just don't let it speak for me. That sentence settled heavily between them. Ben looked away. Something had fractured, not loudly, not violently, but deeply. For the first time, Marianne felt uncertain whether this was something words could repair. They didn't come to the decision right away. It arrived slowly, through exhaustion rather than clarity. They sat on opposite sides of the room now, the earlier closeness replaced by something careful and restrained. Neither wanted to say the wrong thing again. Ben broke the silence first. Maybe, he began, then stopped. He cleared his throat. Maybe we need space. Marianne's chest tightened. Space? She repeated. Not an ending, he said quickly. Just time. To think. To calm down. She studied him, searching his face. Well, she said slowly, space can help, or it can widen cracks. I know, he replied. But right now, I'm afraid I'll say something I can't take back. That honesty mattered. Marianne nodded. I feel that too. They sat with that for a moment. I don't want resentment to grow, she added. I've seen what that does. Ben exhaled, shoulders dropping slightly. Me too. So what are you asking? She said gently. He hesitated. Time apart. Not distance in our hearts, just room to breathe. Marianne closed her eyes briefly. She hadn't imagined this chapter would come so soon. I don't want this to become avoidance, she said. It's not, he insisted. It's me trying not to destroy something I care about. Her voice softened. I believe you. That didn't make it easier. She stood slowly, walking toward the window, looking out at the dimming sky. I won't stay where I have to make myself smaller to be loved, she said quietly. Ben nodded. I wouldn't ask you to, but I also won't force closeness when fear is doing the talking, she continued. He stood too now, stopping a few steps away. So, we pause, he said. She turned toward him. We pause. The word felt heavy, not final, but dangerous. They stood there, facing each other, neither reaching out. I don't know what happens next, Ben admitted. Marianne met his gaze. Neither do I. The honesty between them remained, but the safety felt bruised. They walked to the door together. No rush, no bitterness. At the threshold, Ben hesitated. I don't want you to think this means I don't support you, he said. Marianne nodded. I know. I just need you to know this. My faith tells me growth isn't betrayal. He swallowed. And my fear tells me distance is loss. They stood there, two truths colliding without resolution. Ben opened the door. I'll give you space, he said. Marianne nodded once. I'll use it wisely. He stepped out. She watched him go, heart heavy, aware that love sometimes stepped back not because it was weak, but because it refused to be driven by fear. The house felt different after Ben left. Not empty, just altered. Marianne stood near the door long after it closed, her hand still resting against the wood like it might explain something if she waited long enough. The quiet pressed in slowly, not all at once, giving her time to notice the small things. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, the faint echo of words that hadn't landed the way either of them intended. Well, she whispered, voice barely audible. She stepped back, exhaling carefully, and moved through the house without turning on any lights. She didn't need them. The dimness matched how she felt, unsettled, but not lost. She sat on the edge of the couch, folding her hands together. This wasn't doubt. It was grief, early, undefined, hovering. She bowed her head slightly, not asking for answers, not bargaining, just grounding herself in the familiar stillness she'd learned to trust. Let me walk this honestly, she thought, even if it hurts. Across town, Ben drove without music. The streetlights passed in steady rhythm, each one briefly illuminating his face before slipping behind him again. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. He hadn't planned to leave feeling like this. He hadn't planned for fear to be the last thing that spoke. Idiot, he muttered, then shook his head. No, just scared. The word didn't soften anything. If anything, it sharpened the ache in his chest. He replayed the conversation in fragments, Mary Ann's calm voice, her refusal to bend, the quiet certainty that had both drawn him in and terrified him. She hadn't tried to convince him. She hadn't begged him to stay. That hurt more than anger ever could, because it meant she trusted something deeper than his fear. Ben pulled into his driveway and sat there, engine still running. He rested his forehead briefly against the steering wheel. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. Fear answered easily. You leave before you're left. He shut off the engine. The following days moved slowly. Mary Ann packed in pieces, not rushing, not committing fully yet, but honoring the reality that the fellowship existed, that it mattered, that it was part of who she'd been becoming long before Ben entered her life. She folded clothes carefully, setting some aside, leaving others untouched. Each choice felt symbolic, even when she told herself it wasn't. Sometimes she reached for her phone without thinking. Sometimes she stopped herself. She didn't disappear. She simply waited. Ben filled his time with work. Meetings stretched longer. Emails multiplied. He stayed late, not because he needed to, but because movement felt safer than stillness. At night, though, the quiet returned. He sat alone in his apartment, the city outside indifferent and alive, and realized something that unsettled him deeply. He didn't miss Mary Ann's presence. He missed her steadiness. The way she hadn't asked him to be less afraid, only more honest. He checked his phone more than once, then set it face down, jaw tight. I need time, he told himself. This is time. But time didn't feel neutral. It felt like something slipping through his fingers. The day Mary Ann left for the airport arrived without ceremony. No dramatic countdown. No last-minute changes. Just a suitcase by the door and the quiet resolve that comes from choosing not to let fear write the ending. She stood in her living room one last time, scanning the space. Not nostalgically, just attentively. Everything here had held her well. It still did. She picked up her keys, then paused. Her phone buzzed. Ben's name. Her breath caught, not sharply, just enough to remind her this still mattered. She answered. Hey. There was a pause on the other end. Then his voice, low and careful. I heard you're leaving today. Yes, she said softly. Another pause. Well, he began, then stopped. I didn't want you to go without hearing from me. She leaned against the counter. I appreciate that. I don't know how to say this without making it about me, he admitted. But I need you to know, I wasn't rejecting you. I was reacting to my fear. She closed her eyes briefly. I know, she said. That surprised him. You do? Yes, she replied. I just can't let it decide for me. Silence followed. Ben swallowed. I don't know if I'm strong enough to stand where you stand. Mary Ann's voice remained steady. Strength isn't certainty, it's trust. He exhaled shakily. That's what scares me. I know, she said again. But fear doesn't mean stop. It means choose carefully. They didn't say goodbye like people do in movies. No promises. No dramatic declarations. Just truth. I hope, Ben said finally, that distance doesn't turn this into something we regret. Mary Ann smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. I hope it turns us into people who didn't run. They hung up quietly. At the airport, Mary Ann moved through security with calm efficiency, her steps unhurried. She found her gate and sat, resting her hands on her bag, breathing evenly. Around her, people came and went, departures layered over arrivals, lives intersecting briefly before continuing on. She didn't look back, not because it didn't hurt, because faith taught her that sometimes you step forward without knowing who will follow. Ben stood at his window that evening, watching the city lights blink on one by one. He imagined her in the air somewhere above him, moving towards something unknown, unafraid to grow. The realization hit him slowly, painfully, undeniably. She hadn't left because she loved him less. She'd left because she refused to love from a place of fear. And for the first time since they met, Ben wondered if the real test wasn't distance, but whether he would let fear be the last thing that defined him. The question lingered, unanswered, as night settled in. Distance didn't arrive loudly. It settled. Mary Ann learned the difference quickly. Days passed in careful increments. Morning messages sent before time zones pulled them apart. Brief calls when schedules overlapped just enough to hear each other breathe. Nothing dramatic, nothing broken. Just thin. She sat at a small desk in her temporary apartment overseas, sunlight slanting across unfamiliar walls. Outside, voices moved in a language she was still learning, rhythmic and warm. Inside, everything felt suspended. She typed a message, erased it, typed again. "How are you holding up?" She stared at the words. "Well," she whispered, then sighed and hit send. Ben replied hours later. "I'm okay, busy, thinking about you, thinking about you." The phrase should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt unfinished. Their calls stayed careful, polite, almost formal, like both of them were afraid to lean too hard on something fragile. One night, the video froze mid-sentence. Mary Ann laughed softly. "I think the internet's trying to tell us something." Ben smiled faintly. "Story of my life." The smile didn't reach his eyes. She noticed. She always noticed. "Ben," she said gently, when the connection steadied again, "you don't have to protect me from how you're feeling." He hesitated. The delay wasn't technical this time. "Well," he began, then stopped. He rubbed the back of his neck, gaze drifting off screen. "I don't want to say the wrong thing." "There isn't a right thing," she replied. "Just honesty." He nodded slowly. "I keep waiting for the distance to make this easier. It hasn't." Her chest tightened, not with pain but recognition. "Me neither," she admitted. Silence followed, not empty. Waited. Ben leaned back in his chair. "I thought if I gave you space, the fear would quiet down." "And?" she asked. "It got louder," he said, "because now I have time to imagine everything I can lose." She exhaled slowly. "Distance doesn't create fear, it just removes distractions." He looked at her, something soft breaking through his guarded expression. "You always say things like that." She smiled faintly. "It's not wisdom, it's observation." Another pause. Mary Ann shifted in her chair, fingers curling slightly against the edge of the desk. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Ben straightened instinctively. "Okay." Her voice stayed calm, but her breath changed. "Just enough. I didn't want to say it over a screen," she continued. "But I don't think waiting helps anymore." His stomach tightened. "Mary Ann, let me finish," she said gently. He nodded. "I've been feeling different," she said. "Physically, emotionally. I tried to explain it away at first. Travel, stress, everything new." She paused. "But some things don't explain themselves away." Ben felt his pulse pick up. "What are you saying?" She looked directly into the camera now. "I think I know why this distance feels heavier." Another pause. Her voice softened. "Because it isn't just us anymore." Ben didn't respond right away. Not because he didn't hear her. Because his mind refused to move forward. "Well," he said finally, the word barely forming, "I'm not sure I understand." Mary Ann nodded. "I didn't either. Not at first." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The world didn't stop. It tilted. Ben stared at the screen, chest tight, ears ringing. Not loud, just enough to feel distant from his own body. "Pregnant." The word echoed, colliding with memories he hadn't touched in years. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together. "Ben," Marianne said softly, "say something." He swallowed. His voice broke off. He looked away, then back again, eyes glossy with something dangerously close to panic. "I don't know how to hold that," he admitted. "I don't know how to feel this without everything else rushing in." Marianne nodded. "I know." She didn't rush to reassure him. She didn't tell him it would be okay. She waited. "I wasn't sure how you'd react," she continued quietly. "That's why I needed to say it carefully." He let out a shaky breath. "Careful is good." Silence stretched between them, thick with history. Ben pressed his fingers against his temple. "When you said it wasn't just us, my brain went somewhere else first. I figured," she said gently. "I lost my family," he said, voice low. "And part of me decided that was the price of loving deeply." Her eyes softened. "This isn't asking you to forget them." "I know," he replied quickly. "But it feels like life is returning something I thought was gone forever." That terrified him. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Not because of you, not because of this, but because hope feels dangerous." Marianne finished. "Yes," he whispered. "Exactly." She leaned closer to the screen, as if distance might shrink by will alone. "Hope isn't a replacement," she said. "It's an addition." He nodded slowly, tears slipping free now. "I don't know how to be a father without being afraid," he said. Marianne's voice remained steady. "Then be afraid. Just don't be absent." That landed hard. He closed his eyes briefly, breathing through the rush of memory and possibility colliding inside his chest. "When did you find out?" he asked. "A few weeks ago," she replied. "I needed time to understand what I was carrying, physically and emotionally. And now I needed you to know," she said. "Not because I expect anything, but because you matter." He opened his eyes again, something shifting, slowly, painfully. "This doesn't erase my past," he said. "No," she agreed. "But it doesn't have to be controlled by it either." Ben leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment, then returned his gaze to her. "I don't feel ready," he admitted. Marianne smiled softly. "Readiness isn't required." He laughed weakly through tears. "You really believe that?" "I do," she said, "because life doesn't wait for perfect timing." The call ended later than planned, both of them emotionally drained but unmistakably altered. Ben sat alone afterward, hands resting on his knees, heart racing. For years, loss had defined him. Now, possibility stood in the same space, not demanding, just present. And for the first time, he wondered if the story he'd been telling himself about love and pain was incomplete. Ben flew out as soon as he could, not impulsively, deliberately. The decision came after a night of sitting awake, lights off, hands clasped together like he was holding something fragile that might disappear if he let go. "Well," he murmured into the dark, "I'm not doing this from a distance." The flight felt different from the first one they'd shared months ago. No argument, no fear masked as control, just resolve mixed with nerves. He arrived quietly. No grand reunion. Just Marianne standing near the exit, one hand resting against her side, the other lifting in a small, relieved wave. They hugged carefully, not tightly, not loosely, just enough. "You're really here," she said. He nodded. "I didn't want this part of the story to happen without me." The months that followed moved in steady, uneven rhythms. Doctor visits, long walks, quiet conversations late at night when sleep refused to come. Ben listened more than he spoke, learned the cadence of waiting, the difference between anxiety and attention. Sometimes, fear rose without warning. He'd catch himself staring too long at Marianne's stomach, breath shallow, mind racing toward everything that could go wrong. She noticed. "Hey," she'd say softly, touching his arm. "Stay with me, not ahead of me." He learned to breathe again. When labor came, it wasn't dramatic. It was long, exhausting, real. Ben stayed close, his presence steady, hands offering water, words when needed, silence when not. At one point, Marianne gripped his hand hard, eyes closed, breath ragged. "I can't," she started. "Yes, you can," he said quietly, not commanding, certain. The room filled with sound eventually, new, unfamiliar, undeniable. Ben stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding, as life announced itself in a way he hadn't allowed himself to imagine again. When he finally stepped closer, his legs trembled. He didn't cry right away. He stared. Then he laughed softly, once, surprised, almost disbelieving. "Oh," he whispered, "you're here." Holding his child for the first time didn't erase the past. It reframed it. The memories of loss didn't vanish. They shifted, making room for something else to exist beside them. Ben closed his eyes briefly, breath shaking. This wasn't replacement. This was continuation. They talked about names slowly, not because they couldn't decide, because every name carried weight. Marianne sat propped against pillows, the room dim and calm, the baby sleeping nearby. Ben stood at the window, city lights distant and quiet. "Well," he said, then stopped. He turned back toward her. "There are names I thought I'd never say again." Marianne nodded. "You don't have to rush." He sat beside her, hands resting on his knees. "I don't want to pretend the past didn't exist," he said, "but I also don't want to trap the future inside it." She listened carefully. "What if," she said gently, "the name could honor what was lost without reliving the pain?" He looked at her. "You really believe that's possible?" She smiled faintly. "I believe memory doesn't have to hurt forever." They sat in silence for a while, the baby's quiet breathing filling the room. Ben finally spoke. "There was a name my wife loved. She said it meant light." Marianne reached for his hand. "Then maybe light gets to stay." Tears gathered in his eyes, not sharp, not overwhelming. "Just present. And a middle name," he added after a pause. "Something that belongs to now." Marianne nodded. "Hope doesn't erase memory. It walks with it." The choice felt right, not because it fixed anything, but because it felt honest. When Ben whispered the name aloud for the first time, his voice didn't break. It steadied. He looked down at the child, thumb brushing gently against tiny fingers. "You're not here to replace anyone," he said quietly. "You're here because life keeps going." Marianne watched him, heart full in a way that wasn't loud or fragile. This wasn't closure. It was connection, past and present, linked without being trapped together. Ben leaned back in his chair later that night, exhaustion settling into his bones. For the first time in years, grief didn't sit alone in his chest. It shared space with gratitude. Ben didn't wake up changed. That surprised him. He'd half expected some sudden clarity, an internal shift he could point to and say, "There." That's the moment everything became easier. But the morning after, the world looked the same. The room was quiet. Light slipped through the curtains. Marianne slept nearby, breath slow and steady. The baby stirred softly, a small sound that carried more weight than Ben knew how to name. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped loosely. "Well," he whispered, "here we are." For a long time, he'd lived like someone bracing for impact. Even in joy, he'd been waiting for the moment when life reminded him that love came with loss, that attachment carried a cost he couldn't always afford to pay. But this was different, not because it erased what he'd lost, because it asked him to stay anyway. He stood and walked quietly to the window, looking out at the early morning street. Ordinary sounds drifted up. Someone starting a car, a door closing, the low murmur of a city beginning its day. Life, moving forward without ceremony. He felt it then. Not relief, not certainty, willingness. A quiet decision settling into his chest. Marianne stirred behind him. "Hey," she said softly. He turned, smiling faintly. Didn't mean to wake you. You didn't, she replied. I just felt you get up. He nodded. Couldn't sleep. She studied his face, reading the shifts she'd learned to notice. You okay? He hesitated, then nodded again, slower this time. I think I'm learning how to be. She smiled gently and reached for his hand. He took it without thinking. No fear, no calculation. Later that morning, as he held the baby again, something subtle but profound happened. He didn't imagine the future in terms of what might go wrong. He imagined presence, teaching someone how to ride a bike, sitting through school plays, showing up on ordinary days when nothing remarkable happened. The thought scared him. It also grounded him. Marianne watched him quietly, recognizing the shift before he spoke it. I used to think surviving was the best I could do, he said later, voice low, reflective. That getting through the days without falling apart meant I was strong. And now? She asked. He looked down at the child, then back at her. Now, I think strength might be staying when leaving feels safer. She squeezed his hand. That's faith. He nodded. I used to think faith was about certainty or control. She smiled. It's about trust. That word no longer felt like a threat. Weeks passed. Ben returned to work eventually, but something fundamental had changed. The meetings felt smaller, the urgency less convincing. He still cared, just not at the cost of his presence. When colleagues asked about the time away, he answered simply, life happened. He meant it. At night, when the house settled into quiet again, Ben sometimes felt the old ache resurface. Grief didn't disappear. It never had, but it no longer stood alone. It shared space now, with gratitude, with responsibility, with a cautious but growing hope. One evening, as he rocked the baby gently, he spoke aloud without realizing it. I don't know what tomorrow holds, he said, but I'm here today. Marianne heard him from the doorway. She didn't interrupt. She didn't correct him. She just watched the man she loved choose not to run. Later, when the house was still, Ben sat alone for a moment, thinking about the version of himself who'd once believed love was something to endure carefully, cautiously, with an exit plan always within reach. That man had survived, but this man, this one, was learning how to live. Not perfectly, not without fear, but honestly. He breathed in deeply, then out. Well, he murmured, a small smile forming. I guess I believe again, not in guarantees, not in safety from pain, but in the simple, stubborn truth that life, when met with openness, could still offer something new. And this time, he was ready to receive it. Morning arrived gently now, not with alarms or urgency, but with sound. A small voice, unformed, searching, floated down the hallway, followed by the soft shuffle of feet. Ben stirred before the sound fully reached him, eyes opening to a room that no longer felt like a place he passed through. He lay still for a moment, listening. Well, he murmured, a faint smile forming before he realized it. The house breathed around him. Not perfectly, not quietly, but alive. He rose slowly, careful not to wake Marianne, and padded down the hall. The floor creaked in a familiar way, the kind that told stories if you listened long enough. In the kitchen, early light filtered through the window, catching dust in the air like it had something important to say. The baby fussed softly from the living room. I hear you, Ben said, voice low, steady. I'm coming. He lifted the child gently, instinct guiding him now more than thought. The weight felt right in his arms, not heavy, not fragile, just present. He remembered mornings from another life, empty ones. Back when silence wasn't peaceful, it was hollow. Back when he'd stand at his window, city stretching endlessly below, and feel like something essential had been misplaced without explanation. Back then, the quiet had been loud. Now, quiet came in pieces, between breaths, between small sounds, between moments that asked nothing of him except presence. Marianne appeared in the doorway, hair still messy with sleep, eyes soft. You're up early, she said. He shrugged lightly. Couldn't miss this shift. She smiled and leaned against the frame, watching him with the child. the way his shoulders had relaxed over time, the way his hands no longer trembled. "This house sounds different," she said quietly. He nodded. "It does." They stood there for a moment, no rush to fill the space. Later, over coffee that went cold more often than not, Ben found himself staring at the small chaos of their kitchen, bottles on the counter, a blanket folded unevenly on a chair, notes pinned to the fridge. It wasn't impressive. It was intimate. He remembered the apartment he'd once lived in. Minimal, immaculate, untouched. A place designed for leaving. He hadn't known that then. "Well," he said aloud, then stopped himself, smiling. "Guess I finally figured it out." Marianne raised an eyebrow. "Figured what out?" "That emptiness doesn't announce itself," he replied. "It just sits there until something real shows up and proves it wrong." She nodded, understanding. The day unfolded in small, ordinary ways. Errands, laughter, moments of exhaustion that somehow felt earned. Ben carried the child through the park later, watching families pass, noticing how he no longer felt like an observer peering through glass. He belonged, not because life had turned easy, because it had turned honest. That night, after the house settled again, Ben sat alone for a moment, lights low, listening to the quiet return, but this time it didn't accuse him. It accompanied him. The seat that had once felt empty had never truly been so. He just hadn't known who it was waiting for. Ben thought about the argument more often than he expected. Not with regret, with curiosity. It surfaced sometimes when he least anticipated it. Standing in line at the grocery store, watching rain streak down a windshield, hearing raised voices in passing. An argument on a plane. That's how it had started. Two strangers, confined space, fear, and faith colliding without permission. "Well," he said one evening, sitting beside Marianne on the porch as dusk settled in. "Do you ever think about that flight?" She glanced at him, surprised. "The one where you decided I talked too much?" He laughed softly. "I never said that. You implied it," she teased. He nodded. "Fair." They sat quietly, the memory hanging between them. "I was so sure I was right," he continued. "So sure that control was the same thing as safety." Marianne leaned back, listening. "And you?" he asked. "What were you thinking then?" She considered. "That fear makes people say things they don't mean, and that kindness sometimes sounds like defiance." He nodded slowly. "I didn't know how to hear kindness without feeling judged." "That happens," she said gently. Ben stared out at the street, watching the light fade. "I keep thinking about how easily that moment could have stayed small," he said. "Just another disagreement. Another stranger I never saw again." "But it didn't," Marianne replied. "No," he said, "because you didn't retreat, and I didn't walk away." He shook his head slightly. "That argument didn't just change my mind, it changed my direction." Marianne smiled faintly. "Arguments don't always break things. They reveal them," he finished. A pause followed. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, because honesty arrived early, and that saved us a lot of pretending." He exhaled. "I didn't know then how much pretending I was doing." She rested her head against his shoulder. "I thought strength meant never shaking," he continued. "Now I think it means staying when things shake you." The porch light flicked on automatically, casting a soft glow around them. "That argument taught me something," Ben said. "That the smallest moments can redirect an entire life." Marianne squeezed his hand. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "Only if you let them." He nodded. He had. Ben used to think kindness was soft, optional, something people offered when life had already been gentle with them. That belief unraveled slowly, not all at once, but through a series of small moments that refused to be ignored. It began with Marianne, of course, not with grand gestures, not with speeches, with patience. He saw it in the way she listened without interrupting, in the way she let silence do its work instead of rushing to fill it, in the way she chose to stay curious about people even when they disappointed her. "Well," Ben said one afternoon, rocking the baby near the window, "you know you changed my life, right?" Marianne glanced up from the couch. "I didn't." "You did." he insisted gently. Just not the way people think. She smiled faintly. How do people think? They think kindness is about being agreeable, he said. But yours wasn't. She tilted her head. No? No, he replied. It challenged me. Without attacking me, he looked down at the child, who had settled into a calm, trusting stillness. That argument on the plane, he continued, you could have shut me down, or ignored me, or matched my tone. But I didn't, she said quietly. No, he agreed. You stayed kind without becoming small. That distinction had changed everything. Ben began noticing kindness elsewhere too, in a co-worker who checked in without agenda, in a stranger who held a door a second longer than necessary, in a neighbor who waved every morning without expecting conversation. None of it was loud. All of it mattered. Kindness, he realized, wasn't passive. It required courage to see someone clearly without hardening toward them. He thought back to the man he'd been on that flight. Guarded. Defensive. Certain that vulnerability was a liability. I didn't know how to receive kindness back then, he admitted one night, sitting with Marianne after the house had gone quiet. I thought it came with expectations. She nodded. Sometimes it does. But real kindness doesn't demand anything in return. That's what scared me, he said. I didn't know what to do with something that wasn't transactional. Marianne reached for his hand. You learned. He squeezed her fingers. I'm still learning. And that too was kindness, to allow growth without pretending it was finished. Ben noticed how this awareness began to shape the way he moved through the world. He spoke more gently, listened longer, reacted less defensively when challenged. When fear surfaced, he didn't immediately obey it. He paused. He asked questions. He remembered a woman on a plane who had refused to meet fear with contempt. Kindness hadn't fixed his life. It had redirected it. And sometimes that was the greater gift. Ben no longer measured love the way he used to. There was a time when he believed love needed qualifiers. Safety, control, balance of power. He'd thought love was something you negotiated carefully, ensuring no one held too much of your heart in their hands. Now, watching Marianne move through the house, steady, unassuming, fully herself, he understood how limited that view had been. Well, he said one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter as she prepared dinner, I used to think love was something you earned by proving your worth. She glanced at him. And now I think love shows you your worth before you believe it yourself. She smiled at that. Ben looked around the kitchen, the mismatched chairs, the sound of something simmering on the stove, the quiet presence of a life built without spectacle. Status had once mattered deeply to him. Titles, influence, the unspoken hierarchy of rooms he'd learned to navigate expertly. None of it meant much here. No one asked what he did for a living anymore. They asked if he'd slept, if he needed help, if he was okay. It felt strangely radical. I thought love would cost me everything, he admitted later, sitting beside Marianne on the couch. What I didn't realize is that fear had already taken more. She nodded slowly. Fear always sends the bill later. He laughed softly. You should write that down. Love, he'd learned, didn't erase loss. It made room for it. The grief he carried still existed. Quiet, familiar, part of him. But it no longer dictated his choices or defined his future. Loss had once convinced him that attachment was dangerous. Love taught him that avoidance was the real risk. I didn't stop being afraid, he said. Marianne leaned her head against his shoulder. You just stopped letting fear lead. That was the truth of it. Love didn't promise safety from pain. It promised presence. And presence, real presence, required courage more than certainty. Ben thought again about the man he'd been on that flight. How convinced he'd been that faith was foolish and trust was reckless. He understood now that faith wasn't about ignoring fear. It was about choosing connection anyway. Status faded. Control loosened. Loss softened. Not gone, but no longer alone. Love had not rescued him. It had met him. And in that meeting, something essential had shifted. The plane cabin existed only in memory now. And yet, sometimes Ben could still feel it. the low hum beneath his feet, the shared stillness of strangers suspended together in the air, the way fear had crept into his chest that day, sharp and convincing, dressed up as certainty. He stood at the kitchen window one evening, watching the sky deepen into night, and thought about that seat, the one beside him, the one he'd been so sure was empty. Well, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Marianne looked up from the table, pausing mid-movement. What? He smiled faintly. Nothing. Just thinking. She nodded, understanding without needing more. Ben had learned that some thoughts didn't need explanation. They just needed space. He thought about how easily he'd dismissed a stranger back then, how quickly he'd judged, how confident he'd been that control was the same thing as wisdom, and how one moment of kindness, uninvited, unguarded, had refused to stay small. That argument hadn't been special because it was loud. It was special because neither of them walked away. Ben turned from the window and joined Marianne at the table. The house settled around them, familiar and steady. Somewhere down the hall, a small sound reminded him that life continued in ways he hadn't planned but now couldn't imagine living without. I used to think my life changed when things went right, he said quietly. Now, I think it changed when someone met my fear without matching it. Marianne reached for his hand. Kindness doesn't shout, she said. It stays. He nodded. That was the lesson he carried now. Not that love fixes everything. Not that fear disappears. But that the way we respond to one another, especially in moments of tension, can alter the shape of a life. Ben knew there were people watching this story unfold who were sitting in their own quiet cabins. People holding judgments they hadn't questioned. People convinced that fear was keeping them safe. People one conversation away from a different direction. He turned toward the camera, voice calm, grounded. Maybe you've had a moment like that, he said. A disagreement that stayed with you. A stranger who surprised you. A choice to respond with kindness when it would have been easier to shut down. He paused. If you have, I want you to sit with that for a second. The silence wasn't empty. It was inviting. Because sometimes, he continued, the seat we think is empty, the space we guard the most, is the one waiting to change everything. Marianne smiled beside him, not performing, just present. And if this story reminded you of a moment like that, Ben added gently, take a second to reflect on it. Share it in the comments. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone in it. He took a breath. And if you believe, like we do, that kindness can redirect a life, that love can move through fear, that one honest moment can reshape a future. He smiled, small but certain. Then, like this story, share it with someone who might need it. And if you want more stories like this, stories that stay human, real, and hopeful, subscribe and stay with us. The camera lingered for a moment longer, not on perfection, on presence. The house breathed. The night settled, and somewhere, someone listening grew a little quieter inside, wondering what seat in their own life might not be empty after all.